want to thank the Center for Global Development for hosting us today. They've been a partner in the Girls Summit DC for the last 3 years. And I also want to thank our co-sponsors who are here, the Population Council, the International Center for Research on Women, CARE USA, and Girls Not Brides USA. It's really been a team effort to put on the Girls Summit DC. And this began 3 years ago, actually, when the government of the United Kingdom hosted the first global Girls Summit in London. And at that time, a group of advocates decided that we needed a parallel event in Washington, D.C. to galvanize U.S. action. And so we got organized and started the Girls Summit DC. And in that time, thanks to the very hard work of many of us in this room, we've really built something pretty powerful. We've had a groundswell of support for the powerful actors to tackle the issues that are faced by girls and to really advance the rights of girls. We've had also unprecedented commitments to girls, to adolescent girls. And amongst them, I'll name just a few. We've had the African Union campaign to end child marriage, which has been groundbreaking. We've also had the Global Sustainable Development Goals, which were adopted last year in 2015, and which address many of the issues that are core to the girls that we care about. And we also have the United States government global strategy to empower adolescent girls, which was adopted this year in March. And I know many of you were there at the launch of the global strategy, and it was an incredible moment for all those of us who'd been working on this for many, many years. And the global strategy, the US government strategy on adolescent girls is fascinating, and I really encourage you to read it if you haven't done so. But there's two things that are worth pointing out about it. One is that it places the girl at the center of US foreign policy and US foreign assistance. And that's really, truly amazing if you think about it. A powerful country like the United States has decided that girls are going to be a real focus of its foreign policy. The second thing is that the strategy recognizes that to be effective, programs must address the whole lives of girls. In other words, we're moving away from silver bullet and siloed approaches, and we're really looking at comprehensive approaches that really address all the needs of girls and all their rights, from health to education, to safety, to sanitation, to jobs, to legal protection, and so on. So it's real, very groundbreaking. And now, many of us here, in the advocacy community, working with girls at the ground level in the community, have known this for a long time, that we need to address the full range of girls' needs and really adopt comprehensive approaches. But it's really something for a government like the US government to recognize that, to take this up as their challenge, and hopefully to influence other governments to do the same. So that's our hope, and that's where we're going to work on. So huge shift, lots of momentum. So today what we're going to do is examine how we can make sure that those promises and those commitments are kept. And we'll do two things. One, and we'll look at the research, the latest research on what we know works for girls, what are the ways in which we can make those commitments real. And the second objective is to delve into what US government now needs to do concretely, now that we have the global strategy. What now for the US government and US foreign policy? And we'll also have the pleasure of having UNFPA launch their latest report on the state of the world's population, which focuses on adolescent girls, or actually the 10-year-old girl, which is the girl who's at the cusp of adolescence. And the report is very interesting because, amongst other things, it does tell us the stories of 10 girls aged 10 years old. And we really get to see from their perspective what their needs are, what their rights should be, and what their hopes are, and really, how their future is really our future. So now, to get us started, I'm deeply honored to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Joyce Banda is with us today, and she was the president of the Republic of Malawi from 2012 to 2014. She was twice voted the most powerful woman in Africa by Forbes magazine and one of the most powerful women in the world. Before acceding to the presidency of her country, Dr. Banda was a member of parliament, and she was also the Minister of Gender and Welfare in her country. And in all those roles, she was very consistent. She championed women and girls, persons living with disabilities, and other persons in marginalized conditions. For example, as Minister of Gender and Welfare, she ensured the adoption of a law on the prevention of domestic violence, which has been really key to all the efforts in Malawi to stop and prevent all forms of discrimination and violence against women and girls. She's also established the Joyce Banda Foundation, which guides projects that range from the empowerment of women to providing education for orphans. And before she entered political life, Dr. Banda was a businesswoman, and she was instrumental in the creation of many impressive organizations, such as the African Federation of Women Entrepreneurs, which is now active in 41 countries in Africa, as well as the Council for the Economic Empowerment of Women in Africa. Currently, President Banda is a member of the Global Leaders Council for Reproductive Health. She's also on the Scientific Advisory Board of the Program for Global Health and Social Change at Harvard Medical School. And finally, we're very lucky to have her here because she's currently a distinguished visiting fellow here at the Center for Global Development, a posting she holds jointly with the Woodrow Wilson Center. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming the political leader, entrepreneur, activist, and philanthropist, President Joyce Banda.
Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Let me take this opportunity to recognize the International Women's Health Coalition, the Center for Global Development, Population Council, UNFPA, Girls Not Brides USA, ICRW, and CARE for bringing this community together once again. I want, in a very special way, to recognize Kakenya, who is here, Ntian, Ntain, who I have heard so much about, I have read so much about, and those of us who are women leaders in Africa are proud of her, and she's a champion. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, allow me to take this opportunity to celebrate the work that has been done already, all the achievements of these organizations I'm talking about. Your achievements, Kakenya, the hard work of all those that care about adolescent girls. I also want to applaud the US government for the US global strategy to empower adolescent girls. This is a good example of a government that takes action to empower adolescent girls. As the last speaker said, many people would not even imagine that a powerful government like the US government would focus on adolescent girls. Especially the 4 parts, components of the strategy, addressing all the needs of the girl child. But very special to me is the strategy that focuses on harmful traditions and norms. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as we look at how we can keep our promises, I thought that I should accept this invitation and take advantage of this platform to present a special case. I am here at the Center for Global Development, researching on girls' education. And while adolescent girls from ages 10 to 14 is very important, I would like to ask that we look back and focus on the girl child from age 0 to 10. I say this because I'm making a case in my research that as far as I'm concerned, by the time the girl child is 14, it's too late. First, let me talk about socialization at household level. I'm thinking about the day that a typical village situation. By the way, in Africa, most countries, it's only 20% of the people that are at the level that I am, that are urban-based, that are what we call the affluent. 80% are rural-based. So I'm focusing on that 80%. In a typical village situation, men sit together with their sons, and girls sit together with their mothers. In a typical situation, in a patrilineal system of marriage, 3 brothers will be sitting under a tree with all their sons. The wives will be in their individual homes. They will prepare food and deliver where the men are sitting. And I've been a wife in a typical village. You actually compete to go and deliver the best food at household level. I told those that invited me that I tell my story in a very simple way, but just please get to hear what I'm saying. I will not have any statistics. There are experts here who will do all that. But I just want you to hear my story. So as a wife, you compete with your fellow wives to bring the best to where the men are sitting. So if I have 2 eggs, I will make sure I prepare them well with my fufu or sima or whatever I want to call it and deliver there. And then leave little or nothing for me and my daughters. So, first on my list is to say, men are eating first, most, and best. But the boy child is also eating first, best, and most. At a time when they're developing brain, when they should eat balanced diets, the girl child is being deprived. And I want somebody to convince me that this child will go to school and be at the same level as the boy child. Number 2, there where they're sitting, that's where the only radio in the house is. And there the men are discussing current events and what is going on in the village. So the boy is benefiting from all that as well. We are in the kitchen. The tragedy is that the household doesn't see anything wrong because this is how it ought to be. I have discussed with Kakenya. The tragedy is that if they knew they were doing anything wrong, then I know most families would want to change. But the tragedy is that that's how it ought to be. What that does is it affects nutrition. Now, if I am a pregnant wife and I'm not eating enough, then no wonder Malawi alone has 47 children in that country stunted. So nutrition, all these things I'm talking about, they need proper research. I'm talking what I have lived through experience. We are told now by experts that the first 1,000 days is very important, from the day you conceive to 1,000 days. So if you are eating last and least, I don't know what that is doing to the baby that you are carrying. Number 2, it's health. Let me give my own example. I went in to have hysterectomy in 1995 and agreed with my doctor that he would not put me to sleep. He would do what they call epidural or something. But then he tried and then put me to sleep. So the next day I was asking him, why did you put me to sleep? We had agreed. My mother was sitting there. And the doctor said, you don't know? I said, no. What? He says, oh, your back is bent like this. So I tried to inject, I couldn't get there. you must have started carrying heavy things when you were 5 years old. And I remember how everybody praised me in the village for being a very hardworking girl child, for carrying heavy loads when I was so young. So at the household level, the boy won't carry anything on his head. To start with, it's wrong. It's not done. But the girl child will carry something either on the head or on the back. So Heath, the girl child grows up with deformities. But this is happening between 0 and 9. I'm not talking about adolescent. I'm talking about between 0 and 9 years old. Because when I was carrying this heavy stuff, I was 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old. Next is defilement. Now, somehow, men have convinced themselves that if they defile a child who is between 0 and 5, 6, they cleanse themselves of the HIV virus. I established, when I was president, what I called the one-stop destination for abused women. So the day I launched that place, I went and found a man and a woman sitting there with an 18-year-old baby on her laps. And I thought they were husband and wife, and the man told me, I'm not her husband, I'm her neighbor. I heard her child cry every day for a year. One day I broke the door and found her husband raping this child. And so if I had heard this child crying for 1 year, he must have started when this child was 8 months old. When we checked, we were told that the man had been told by a witch doctor that that's what he needs to do in order for him to cleanse himself of the HIV virus. And I asked this woman how foolish she could be to allow her husband to do this to her child. And she told me, Mom, look at me. And she was a child herself. She had been married at 13, so she was only 15. So she needed a mother herself. But she was dependent on this man. So she said to me, I didn't know what else I could do because this man was actually my breadwinner. So there's nothing I could do. So the child, the girl child between 0 and 10 is a victim of defilement. The witch doctor doesn't say go and find a 15-year-old. A 15-year-old is a wife already. But a child, a baby, between 0 and 9 years old. There was a program on BBC lately, and they talked about a man from Malawi boasting to be a hyena. Hyenas are men that are recruited to cleanse girls to have sex with small babies, small children, so that they grow up to be beautiful women. It's not happening in the whole Malawi, and it's not easy to find a victim or a perpetrator in the country. I was very surprised when BBC came looking for me and phoned me to say, have you got any comment? I said, I can't even believe that that hyena was talking to you because in Malawi we can't find them. But he was boasting that I have slept with 108 girls. They pay me something like 30 cents. And I have slept with 108, and I am HIV positive. Harmful practices. Initiations take place between 7 and 10. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm making a case that is the age group where we need to start focusing our attention. So, way forward. I believe that we should continue to discuss this part if there's any way to start this discussion from this age group, from age 0 and 9. I know how we can do it. We just need resources. We just need support. Most often, people from other continents, they say, we don't want to get involved because we get criticized, that we are interfering in traditions and culture that are local. But we are saying now practitioners are there, champions are there, women leaders are there. We have decided that we shall take responsibility. What we are going to need is to forge smart partnerships with our brothers and sisters from across our continent who want to tackle the issue of girls, of young girls. The way to do it, one is behavior change of mindset. We tried in Malawi with maternal health. We were able to reduce maternal death from 675 to 460 in 2 years by using the power structures that we have of chiefs. We have maybe 7 structures in Malawi, from paramount chief, senior chief, traditional chief, group village headman, so all the way down. By engaging them and turning them into champions, by making them understand that when women die in their village, it's their fault. And then by banning the delivery of babies by traditional birth attendants. And then working with the private sector to increase capacity at clinics so that we have holding shelters where women can go and wait to deliver. We were able, in 24 months, to change the situation in Africa. For me, the chiefs are the custodians of tradition and culture. Just like we did with maternal health, we can do with girls' education. We can do with even initiations, because it happened in my community. The church was able to convince the chief that he will not lose his income that he makes when girls go for initiation. The families will still pay, but he must hand over the function of initiation to the church. So the girls still go for initiation, but it is in the church. They pray, they sing hymns, they are told to be nice girl, polite, nothing harmful. Psychologically, the family believes they have sent their child for initiation, the chief gets his money at the end of the day. A win-win situation. The next is maybe to look at the education program that is being implemented by an organization called Think Equal. I am a board member of Think Equal. This project seeks to support rights and equality education in primary schools. Think Equal's mission is to target children from age 3, sensitized to their rights and able to refuse to speak out, and teachers also to be trained. In January, 117 schools have accepted to introduce rights in their schools in 18 countries under Think Equal, and I'm a member of that board. You can Google it. 2, the Joyce Banda Foundation tried. The schools that I built are built on 4 building blocks: global understanding, universal values, excellence, service to humanity, and rights. And you find that by the girl child gets to 10 years old, if you ask her, why do you go to Joyce Banda Foundation? Because the school is built on 4 building blocks. I'm going to be a leader. What do you mean by universal values? Oh, to respect my values, to respect my tradition, but also to make sure that I coexist with others, peaceful coexistence, and so on and so forth. But by age 10, the child knows her rights. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, what I would like to appeal for, what I would like to see USAID do, or the US government do, is to ensure that they provide channels for more research into what I've been saying, for data collection. The USAID government, the US government should find ways of mobilizing us leaders on the ground, forge smart partnerships with us. And I know that at the end of the day, we shall succeed, because this time it is our fight. I would like to close by saying the following. In 1989, I met a gentleman from US called Don Henry, running a US government project called RED Project. He's the one that encouraged me, because I spoke openly at a meeting against abuses to women and girls. He is the one that introduced me to Carol Pizzi, who was then country director of USID. I walked into Carol's office in December 1990. She funded the first needs assessment survey that we conducted. I truly believed that economic empowerment of women was key to social and political empowerment, but I didn't know how to go about it. I formed an organization called the National Association of Business Women. The support for institutional capacity building, training, and all was provided by USID. I was even funded to go to Grameen Bank. When I came back, I designed a special program for microfinance for my country. By 1996, we had mobilized 50,000 women. 20,000 of those had received microfinance. I received the Africa Prize for Leadership for the Sustainable End of Hunger. But in an impact study funded by USID in 1999, revealed that 73% of the women we had supported had gone out of poverty forever, and 84% had gained success at household level. I went on. 4 women from the organization ended up cabinet ministers for women and children. And I am one of those, went all the way to State House. I'm saying all this to show how beneficial and what impact investing in women can do. And I'm saying all this here in America so that the USID might get to know that we in Africa are grateful, but are hoping that they will continue, and all these distinguished organizations that are here will continue to support us. I am a living example of what can happen if you invest in women. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the girls in Africa can't wait. And I was 39 when I started working with USID. I'm 66. Even I am running out of time. But I want to promise you that I will work and work until the job is done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Banda, for your powerful remarks, for sharing your story, and for your outstanding leadership on these issues. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rosanna Kim. I am the Policy Advisor on International Development here at the British Embassy, and I also represent the UK Department for International Development, DFID, here in Washington. It's a real privilege to be with you here today to help introduce the distinguished members of your first panel for this event. And I'd like to ask the panel members to start making their way to the stage. Now, before I introduce the panel that you're going to be hearing from today, I wanted to take this opportunity to say a few words on behalf of the British government. As you heard, in 2014, the UK was proud to host the first Girls' Summit in London. And we at the Embassy were also proud to co-host the first Girls' Summit DC here with CGD. And as you've heard, over the past 2 years, there has been tremendous progress in tackling these issues. You've heard about some of that progress already today. Let me just add a few more highlights. 11 governments are now developing national plans to tackle child early and forced marriage and ending FGM. Nigeria has passed a law prohibiting FGM in 2015, and the Gambia has recently announced their intention to do the same. And we have seen real leadership at the country level. National Girl Summits have been held in Bangladesh, in Uganda, Ethiopia, Nepal, and a regional Africa Girl Summit was held in Zambia. But we all know that there is still much more work to be done. And I know I don't need to tell you this, but if you imagine that you're a typical adolescent girl in northwestern Nigeria, there is a 1 in 5 chance that you've undergone FGM between the time of being born and turning 5. That you've had your first child by age 14. And that by 15, you were married and you've dropped out of school. And this reality, as we all know, is simply unacceptable. And that is why work around empowering women and girls, adolescent girls in particular, remains a top priority for the UK government. And you can see this reflected in the policies and actions of our government at the highest level. If you look at the 2015 Conservative Party manifesto, the UK made a series of bold commitments to lead the international community to tackle violence against women and girls, to end FGM, and to tackle child and early and forced marriage. And our new leaders, as you may have heard about, have made a strong commitment to reaffirm those commitments. As part of this effort, the UK has made the largest ever donor commitment to ending FGM with a 5-year, 35 million program in Africa, and we also launched a 36 million program to accelerate action to end child marriage. The UK was also committed to embedding these issues in the global goals, and we are now focused on translating those international commitments into transformative action. I'd also want to highlight that as part of her role, our new Secretary of State for International Development, Priti Patel, has recently become a founding board member of the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children. And this is a group that will be focused on lobbying governments, multilaterals, civil society, religious leaders, and businesses, and all forms of abuse and exploitation against children, FGM and child marriage included. Now, going forward, the UK remains committed to playing a key role in leading the international community on these issues. Generating and using good research and evidence to drive our programming is a key part of this effort and what you will hear more about here today. Now, DFID invests more than $300 million a year in the production of new primary research, and in the past several years, we focused intensely on the production of research and building the evidence base around what works to protect and empower adolescent girls. This includes an FGM research program that's being run by the Population Council, and a program which I believe you'll hear more about today, the Gender and Adolescent Global Evidence Program, which we're working closely on with ICRW. So without further ado, let me introduce the speakers for your first panel, focused on the topic of what's needed for programs and research. So starting on my right, we have Kekenya Nataya, the founder of the Kekenya Center of Excellence. We have Doris Bartel, the Director of Gender and Empowerment at CARE. We have Toy Nyo, the Deputy Director of the Population Council's Poverty, Gender, and Youth Program. And finally, we have Suzanne Petroni, the Senior Director for Global Health, Youth, and Development at the International Center for Research on Women. So with that, let me kick it off to Kekenya to get this discussion started. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I am quite honored to be here with this amazing panel. I just listened to President Banda and my heart is like, wow, we have a lot to do and still have a long way to go to actually fully bring girls to that table to make sure that they have their dreams are realized. I founded the Kekenya Center for Excellence in 2009, and I started with a boarding school because my idea was that, as President Banda just talked about, is the issues that girls face in rural communities are difficult and extreme. And I thought that for me, where I needed to start is I started with 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds and put them in the school, because that's when the community is actually telling them your value is that you need to become a wife, you need to have children. That's pretty much what you're told the rest of your life. And for those who know my story, that I was engaged when I was 5, so I was one of those ones who are told that the husband is here. And I started that school because I really just felt that I needed to, there's no one way to actually solve the issues that we have of empowering girls. So I needed to put everything together. So we talk about health, we talk about PADS, we talk about education, and not just access, it's about quality education. I just needed them to be there. And I think girls face a lot of issues in terms of at home, they're the ones caring for their little siblings, and President Banda just talked about, we haven't even looked at what impact those early work that they start doing is on their children. And I am excited to be with this team that has done amazing work throughout the world. And we will have this discussion, what's needed for programs and research for the advancements of girls. And I wanted to start with Twa, and to discuss, tell us what works. And what works? And on that also to say, what do we need to do to show that what we know what works? So there are two, what works? And then how do we show that we know what works?
Okay. That's a very easy order to talk about, and Yeah, take notes. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much to be among a powerhouse of women. And I am delighted to be the designated male panelist and the designated handful of male in the room today. We got to change this. I got to go and rally the troop and make sure they stand behind the girls' cause as well, as much as I do. So before I'll tell you about what works, prior to joining the Population Council, I spent a number of years directing the International Department of Research at Murray Stopes International, an organization that deliver sexual and reproductive health services to about 15 million girls a year. So it's impressive, and I can really see the role of evidence and how it can accelerate program for girls. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And you know, we have talked about a lot of things, a lot of initiative and development, and I want to applaud them in the U.S. as well as national, as the international level. Girls are at the center of the global development goals. We see the 2 billion pledge commitment to invest in programs and policy to improve the well-being and health of girls across the globe. So the question here is how do we ensure that such investment translate to what works on the ground for girls, right? So I have two assertions, and I came prepared with slides just because I feel a bit inadequate across my powerful female panelists. The first is that innovative and scalable ideas for girls on what works need to put the girl at the center. And we've seen that across these commitment and et cetera. And then I'll talk a bit more about what does that mean to put girl at the center, something we call Girl Center program at the Population Council. And second is that ideas on what works should be evidence-based, one, or that it should be coupled with rigorous evaluation, right? Without rigorous evaluation, how would you know that your effort works for the girls? And does it really make an impact, right? So that's my two assertions. If you walk away from today, those are the 2 points. So what is the Girl Center approach? Conventional programs often neglect to reach the most vulnerable girls and consider the complexity of girls' life. We, at the council, we've been pushing for start early and start young, and I really applaud President Banda today to talk about the 0 to 9 as well, right? So we gotta use data to understand where are the girls at the highest risk, right? Where are the girls that are out of school, not living with parents, affected by HIV, for instance, right? And then the second is that now my mic is, so I can complain that my mic was, now it's on, I can feel it. Whoops. And then the second is that it's involved being explicit in understanding who are you trying to reach and with what type of program. So it's important to segment the population of girls. Again, not all girls are the same, right? The 10 years old are very different from the 14 years old, right? And then we gotta take a multi-sectoral approach to build girl asset, social, economic, education, and health, right? Because we gotta consider, again, Francois said it earlier, but we gotta consider the whole girl and her complexity into account. And often, too many times, we've seen the program are measuring at the output level, the number of books distributed, the number of condoms distributed, right? The number of gender-based violence reported. We gotta measure at the girl's level, right? The outcome at the girl's level. Can she read? What is her literacy skill? Is she performing well in school? Does she have a bank account? And does she have the spending power? So I'm pushing the community to go beyond a little bit and think about how do we ensure we deliver effective program for girls. And then I want to delve onto the point of the whole girl a little bit. So at the council, we take the a multi-sector approach to build protective asset, social, cognitive, health, and economic. Through our research, we understand that one asset can reinforce the other. If the girl have a bank account, she can pay for her health care, right? If a girl have the cognitive skill to negotiate her social status within her family or her villages that President Banda talked about, then she can improve her social capital, right? So this approach allows program to reduce a wide range number of risks, and you can see HIV to social exclusion to the lack of education that often faced by adolescent girls. So as you can see on this slide is that we, not only the council, we run Growth Center program across the globe, but we also provide technical assistance to programs around the world. We're working with our partners. And I want to use an example of a Growth Center program for HIV prevention in Ethiopia. We know that adolescent girls continue to be marginalized by the HIV epidemic, right? So this program, and what is really crucial about the example I give you here is that really using data to segment girls, right? So this program was funded by PEPFAR, and we were tasked when we wanted to look for, to identify the most vulnerable girls in these communities, right? So through our formative research, we have found two segments of girls that are most affected. One are those rural and married girls, and then the other are the out of school urban girls. And this is important because these girls, these two segments require different type of social asset building, right? So for the urban out of school girls, they are experiencing social isolation. So we're providing them through the Girls Club, we're providing safe spaces, mentor, social network, alongside literacy skills training as well as health services, right? And then for the rural girls, we take a different approach because to build their power dynamic, negotiation skills within their relationships, alongside with financial literacy, bank accounts, as well as health services, right? And you can see some of the impact of the program, but I think the point for this is that we gotta segment the different population of girls, right? And we continue to work through ensuring that HIV prevention program are being growth center by being involved in the DREAM Consortium. And we recently launched a collection of tools. I'm gonna have it here. We don't have all the copies here today, but we recently launched it and we're gonna have a webinar on it. But it's translate what works for program staff to understand how do they design, tweak, and then measure and evaluate their growth center program. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. So I'm gonna go to my second assertion is that there is a lack of rigorous research on adolescent girls. And I hope Suzanne will join me in agreeing with this note. So when we systematically look at the available literature out there over the past 24, 25 years, a quarter of a decade, we only found 77 research articles on 61 programs that focus on adolescent girls in low and middle income countries, staggering. And then only about 30% of them were considered high quality research. Again, if you don't have high quality evidence to guide your investment strategy, then you are not making an impact on girls' life, right? And then the recent supplement on evidence and evidence gap on adolescent health also points to the poor quality of evaluation that are out there, as well as the insufficient use of randomized control evaluation, right? So how do we fill this gap? At the council, we fill this gap by investing in rigorous evaluation across the globe. Currently, we have about 15 impact evaluation across the world right now, addressing different components or evaluating the multi-sector approach that I was talking about. I think from my perspective is that having multi-site studies is important because you can really apply your knowledge from one local context to another, as well as being able to synthesize into global lesson learned so that we can inform global strategies, global investment, but also local policy, right? And we do this by using randomized control trials to understand what works and as equally what doesn't work. Because you don't want to invest in program that doesn't work. It's simple to say, but often we see that's what people are doing on the ground. François is agreeing, so I'm glad. I'm glad two people agree. And then we employ rigorous process evaluation, not to understand what works and what doesn't work, but understand how and why certain things work on the ground so that we can tweak them in the future. And then we also couple that with costing analysis so that we can inform decision maker on how to invest when a program works, right? So I just want to take a moment to describe one of our program and the process of how we taking what works, as Kakanya say, and then bringing it up to scale, right? In our Balika study in Bangladesh, it's a skill building evaluation being implemented through a being evaluated through a randomized control trial methodology. We found that in the intervention arm, we were able to reduce child marriage by 20%. These are across 18,000 girls in 72 communities, right? And we also improve education, girls who stay in school by 20%, right? And as you all know, child marriage is prevalent across South Asia. So right now, we are working with UNFPA and the government of Bangladesh to figure out how do we scale it up with the government commitment that President Banda talked about. But then next month, we're gonna go to Nepal and hold a regional meeting with partners in the region, the Nepalese government, and our partners from India and Pakistan to think about how do you replicate and learn from Balika so that they can address this in their program as well. And we continue to be evaluating this replication and scale up process, right?
Thank you. Oh, yes.
A couple more points. Sorry.
I wanted, we could have a conversation, and I think you
Right.
described what works, and I wanted the other colleagues to jump in
Oh,
so that
right,
we can
okay.
all have a conversation.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Sorry, Suzanne.
No, it's okay because you've actually set up the
Yeah.
stage very well for the discussion that we're going to have. And I know we're going to have a discussion, but I also have time for questions for the audience so that we can all make it
Chatty.
chatty.
Yeah. And not just me chatting.
Not necessarily that specific one. I think I wanted to also care works amazingly throughout the world, and you have programs that actually work, and you've scaled quite a number of programs. That's why you're able to work in all these areas. So if you can, I think when we talk about advancement of women or girls, we always talk about formal or formal education. If you can talk a little bit about what CARE is doing and in terms of a non-formal settings, because I think we have girls in school and we know they need good teachers, but if you can talk a little bit about that. And continuing with the question about what is missing. Every year, there's always strategies and there's papers coming out, but it seems that we are not actually addressing the whole thing. So what is missing? What is missing in the discourse about girls' advancement?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And I really agree with the points that you made earlier about what works. Thanks for setting the stage for that.
Exactly.
If I can add to some of your remarks, I think part of what's missing from the discourse and from our programming is at the heart an analysis and an attention to some of the issues that Dr. Banda mentioned, which are really around gender discrimination and power imbalance. So in order to really address those gender and power discrimination issues, I think we need to put that at the heart of our programming. So in addition to evidence, I think we need to be looking at what works to address those inequalities, those fundamental inequalities. And I think that includes working with men and boys as part of that solution. In addition, I would put a plug in for comprehensive sexuality education. I think the concept of sexuality is so, I think it contributes to positive development for girls and for us as a society at whole, but it still puts some fear into all of us, and certainly from the part of the government ministries that we work with, I think there's still a fear of that word and of some of those issues, particularly for girls. So can we put an emphasis on comprehensive sexuality education from a choice and from a rights perspective into our programming? And lastly, I'll say that, Dr. Banda, you mentioned social and gender norms and cultural practices as what's at the heart of some of the barriers for girls. And yet our programs are not always designed to address norms per se. I think we have a ways to go in learning at how to address changes in norms in addition to behavior change of individuals and policy change of institutions and of our governments. I think we put a lot of money into institutional change and policy change and behavior change. But what works to change norms? That's part of what we're trying to focus on in CARE and starting to tease out how a social norms intervention would look different from a behavior change intervention. It could be additive and perhaps more comprehensive and maybe more sustainable than what we've been doing in the past. So I'm really excited about some of those interventions and some of those new measures for how to measure changes in norms as we go along. So I'd just add those to your slides.
Great.
And how do you scale up? Because that's a big thing. If you're going to look at a rural community, each one of them is different. They have, I work in a very rural community. So some of the things that we know, of course, we've talked about, including the men and boys, including the social norms. How do you tackle them? How do you scale those programs? Because I think we do know what works, but how do we scale them up? How do we go to every rural community that President Banda said 80% in most of rural Africa, that's where the population is. So how do we go there and how do we scale those programs?
We're testing a model right now in Ethiopia, in the Oromia areas of Ethiopia, where we're looking at how to scale social norms interventions for adolescent girls in a multi-sectoral way. So part of our scaling approach is through government support, but I think also norms give us an opportunity to go to scale in a way that even government interventions don't, because social norms are something that they're invisible, like magnetism or like gravity. You can't really see it, but you can feel it. And it is, it can change more quickly than you can imagine. When we've done focused work on norms, it can change quickly in 6 months, 2 years. This is faster than we think it's actually possible. So I think scaling is actually possible through a number of different means.
Okay. Susan, so since last year, there was a summit here. What have we seen? What has happened in the past year in this field of girls?
Yeah, a lot, and mostly good. So we at ICRW have been trying to do what we can to fill that lacking evidence base that we know exists. And in particular, among the many issues that we're building the evidence on and have for many years now, child marriage is one of the areas that we've learned more about and are trying to create a more complete understanding of not only what is driving child marriage, but ways to respond, to prevent, and to respond to the needs of married girls. So, yes, we know some of what works, but we really don't have a strong enough understanding of what works for different populations in different contexts around the world. Much of the work that ICRW and others have done over the past couple of decades on child marriage really comes from South Asia or Ethiopia, where the context regarding child marriage is very different, right? Parents are often the ones who are making the decision to marry their girl off, to take her out of school, and very often the girl doesn't even know the man that she's being forced to marry. The situation is the same in many contexts, but very different in others. So over the past year, we have put out some results from recent studies that we conducted in places in sub-Saharan Africa where we really haven't had that much of an understanding about child marriage and what's driving it. very recently, we put out a report funded by the Packard Foundation looking at child marriage in Kenya and Zambia. And there we found very strongly the two drivers, the precursors of child marriage were early pregnancy and school dropout. So unlike many settings where we have evidence around child marriage, sex takes place before marriage. And pregnancy often results. Why? Because girls and boys don't have an understanding that sex can actually lead to pregnancy. And once they become pregnant in these communities, they have no option but to marry. And they have no option but to drop out of school. Or if they're already out of school, they have no option to return to school because the schools, despite the law, will not permit pregnant or parenting girls in school. So it's this cycle that's happening there. We did some research with UNICEF in Senegal, where we saw the rates of child marriage have been decreasing pretty significantly over the past 10, 15 years. We wanted to understand why that was happening. What we found is that the age of first sex was staying the same, but the age of marriage is increasing. And there is no new information or access to services for these girls who are now having sex outside of marriage and becoming pregnant and may not be marrying, because what was happening over the past 10, 15 years to reduce the rates of child marriage is men are migrating to urban communities for work. So they have girlfriends at home. They get pregnant because they have no access to comprehensive sex education or youth-friendly health services. They leave the girls in the communities who are now pregnant and unmarried, and the communities stigmatize these girls. So very different contexts and various situations that require, in many cases, different, but in many cases, the same interventions, right? Comprehensive sexuality education, youth-friendly reproductive health services, access to family planning for young people before marriage can help to prevent child marriage. So that's some of what we've been finding. I talked last year at this event about the impact study that was funded by USAID, where we looked at the impact of a conditional cash transfer on the age of marriage in Haryana, India. We've continued to do more research on that, but the bottom line there was that the government providing a bond in the mid-1990s to parents of daughters who were born at that time on the condition that the girl remain unmarried when she turns 18, and the girls were just turning 18, so we were able to find out what happened. That bond did not necessarily work. Why? Because a simple cash payment is not going to overturn patriarchal values in the community. There was no corresponding intervention to look at the social norms, to look at the value of the girl, to provide girls with alternatives to marriage. It was this belief that the silver bullet solution, the cash payment, would simply solve this deeply entrenched problem, and it didn't work. So those are some of the new findings that we've had. I have to note, because I know a lot of people in this room have been eager for the results of a study that we're currently conducting with the World Bank on the economic impacts of child marriage. And there we're trying to build a deeply rigorous understanding of just what does child marriage cost, not just the social cost, but the economic cost, the cost to development, the cost to poverty alleviation to countries, so that we can all better help policymakers understand the need to invest in ending the practice. And I'm happy to tell you that we will be able to share results with you on December 8th from the next phase of research. It's a long study, so stay tuned. We'll be coming out with some new findings soon.
Thank you. What's not happening? Twa.
What's not happening? Well, what's not happening is that we're not, I think a lot of this commitment and pledge need to be backed by the value of investing in rigorous research so that we can learn from them, right? Suzanne just talked about the cash transfer program, which is, I think we should know by now that a single bullet desire is not going to address development issue. We all should know that by now. But more and more, the global community are still having a thirst for that, So I think for us is that whenever we're designing a program, we really draw out a strong theory of change to understand what is the pathway that understand the mechanism to school dropout, to child marriage, and etc., so that you can intervene through the pathway a bit more intelligently. And then also that taking that multi-sector approach, and then the cash transfer program is a good example because it doesn't address everything, right? So how does cash transfer affect other norms and etc. within the communities as well at the household level? So I think people have to be a bit thoughtful when they design a program. So I'm continue to advocate for evidence-based kind of intervention. We have a DFID-funded program that was mentioned earlier is the Adolescent Girl Empowerment Program. And it is a multi-sector approach. It's implemented in Zambia. It's focused on girls as young as 10 years old, right? And we have another round of data collection. It's a 5 years program and study. So preliminary results have shown that we have improved financial literacy, saving contraceptive knowledge, condom use, transactional sex. But then, we haven't seen a strong indicator on STI and HIV prevalence yet. And I want to bring home the point here is that we are working with an extremely young population. So we have to, when we invest in this program, it's a long haul game, people. It's not that 3 years, it's on that it's 5 years. We are focusing, if President Banda is advocating for 0 to 9, I'm advocating from 0 all the way up to she is safely transitioned into. So you got a good 2 decades to kind of focus your investment. So that's not what's happening. Yeah.
That's great. I think I'm going to open it up to the audience to ask questions. Do we have a mic? Yes, I think so. I've been told. We'll start here and then we go to you. So 1, and then here in front.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for your presentation.
Stand so that people see you and say your name
Sure.
too. If you can say your name, where you're from, and
Sure.
then we address.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for your presentation. My name is Alvine. I'm a recent PhD graduate from University of Massachusetts, Boston, in public policy. And to be honest, I'm kind of new to this whole girls' education world, which is kind of strange because I'm originally from Cameroon, and I got here in college in about 2007. And I was able to, go through all my undergrad, master's, and then I just recently finished my PhD. And not until recently, I started thinking about what I can do to give back. So one of the questions I've been having as I'm learning about all these different issues that girls face, especially in African countries, is I'm wondering what is being done to support the ones that have been successful so that they can help, they can help the ones, the way I'm thinking now is I'm just wondering, given my journey and my experience, how can I support girls who would like to have that same or similar journey? And I'm just wondering, because a lot of these issues are very foreign, right? Very foreign to me because my experience was very different. And the second part of my question is, how are how can I say this? How are the countries where the successful countries? How is there sort of knowledge sharing across countries that have been successful at improving girls' education or improving rights for women? How is the knowledge sharing happening, and is that being supported by these organizations?
Do you want to take a few questions?
Yes. There was a question there.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Mohini Malhotra, and thank you for highlighting this issue. I think something running across a common thread across the presentations and starting with President Banda is what do you do about these social norms? And my question would be, how do you influence the witch doctor to give different advice? And what is the use of social media to reach across the board? And are we engaging with people who come from the Googles and the Amazons and the digital world to try to influence social norms and to be able to scale them, to be able to have that impact and evidence that we're all looking for? And what are your approaches and thoughts on that? Thank you.
We could do one more from the side. Back.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gladys Changachirere. I am from Zimbabwe, but I'm currently doing a Reagan Fasel Democracy Fellowship with the National Endowment for Democracy. So back home, I work with the Institute for Young Women Development, which is an organization that works with young women in rural farming and mining communities, promoting their participation in decision-making processes. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation and also quite an inspiring remark by Dr. Banda. I want to follow up on what you were talking about, Doris, around how we can influence norms, and you were also talking about how can we further influence norms and attitudes within institutions. I want to take this opportunity to also extend my question to Dr. Banda. So as somebody who's working with young women and girls around their participation in decision-making processes, one of my experiences tells me that I think many countries have done so much, especially in Africa, in terms of putting up policy and legislative frameworks that are aimed at empowering the girl child. But we then get stuck when it comes to the implementation of those policies and legislations. And I just wanted to find out from the panel and Dr. Banda, do we think that if we expand our education to the girl child at very early stages, will that contribute towards us already creating a pool of women who can then get into institutions of government and can be able to really understand and implement the policies in a manner that they really acknowledge that addresses the different challenges that are faced by women and girls? Because I think what we have seen in most of our countries is we have these male presidents, we have these male government officials who still believe that women belong to the kitchen and the other rooms. And then to expect that man to implement a policy and a law that empowers a girl child, honestly, I don't see that happening. So do we see an opportunity there to expand the horizon of our programs targeting young women and girls in a manner that we already prepare them for institutions and then to go and implement some of the lucrative laws and policies that we already have? Thank you.
So, thank you. Do you want to start with her question? Knowledge sharing. And I will actually, let me just talk about the your desire of going and giving back. I did that. So it's possible. There are very few of us out there who actually want to go back to a rural community and make change. And even though you're thinking that it is very foreign, and it's something that you might not have seen or experienced when you are in your community, and then now you are actually now learning and you're thinking, my goodness, my country is like this. It's good that you can go back and influence because you understand the culture, you understand the language, you understand we are needed. All of us are needed to actually go and make those differences. So it's possible. Talk to me, I can mentor you into that area. But can you share about the knowledge sharing?
Can I just, if I can comment on this point. So when you asked that question, if she asked me to answer, I was going to say, no, you answer, because this is the example. And you know what's so fantastic about Kekenya as an example, she's an example of a girl who grew up in a rural community and faced many of the issues that we talk about, and is giving back and is able to use that experience to share with the world, literally, what is happening in rural communities and that things can change. So I met you, 13 years ago when you first came to DC as a young woman in her 20s. And I often think of Kenya as an example of why we need youth leadership and youth engagement, right? We need to support young leaders to speak out on behalf of their peers and to advocate on behalf of their peers, because they are so much closer to these issues and they can help us, wonky folks sitting at our desks here in Washington or New York or wherever we are, really understand how to communicate better and how to act in a way that really responds to the needs of youth. So I think that actually goes to, I think, that last question that was asked, Glennis, is that?
Yeah.
About, does expanding education for girls, is that in itself going to solve the problem if we don't also look at the institutions? Education is absolutely critical. It has so many impacts, and we've seen so many outcomes from girls' education. But no, on its own, without the social norm change, without the institutional infrastructure changes, without those same girls being empowered with the skills to be able to lead by example, we're not going to see the changes that we need. So I think that is one of the pieces that's missing here is youth leadership, youth engagement. None of us, Kenya, you're not the 23-year-old I met a while ago.
Nope.
We're all young at heart. None of us is the adolescent girl. None of us is a young person. We should have young people at the table today and every day helping us to learn, and we should be empowering them to act for the future.
But I also want to add, don't underestimate the power of the role model. I think the imagination is sparked, the hope for the future is sparked when you know of somebody who has created a future for herself that she really desires and wants that looks different from what seems to be available. So regardless of where you are in the world, role modeling is incredibly important, and speaking the power of the positive, I think, is incredibly useful in this case. So I'm talking about the future as if it's already here and not as if it's some so far distant thing that we may not achieve it in our lifetimes. I think those are really incredibly important things that all of us have to take as lessons away from this. This is going to change, and we are going to make it happen. And that kind of emphasis in your discourse will make those social norms change.
Yes. Do you have any? I was going to give you to be the last one, so.
Okay, I'll make it quick. So I think your question is so inspiring, and I came across this organization, and I am fairly new to the girl space. I always work in reproductive health, but expanding my horizon and looking at girls at a multisexual way. And I came across this organization that called Safe Hands for Girls. And they are actually addressing issue that refugee girls from the developing country that come to the US, and what are they facing here in different communities. So that's something that you might want to look up and get involved with. They implement some of the most girl-centered program here at home, and it's a relevant issue. I want to tackle a couple of things here. I think yes, addressing education is important, but a lot of through our field experience, our research, we found that engaging communities and community leaders have helped our girls' clubs and our intervention to be effective, so that we're not implement this program on our own. And there was a question on social media and its role. I think, there is a role for social media, of course. I'm evaluating an intervention for promoting the new woman condom in Zambia at the moment, and a strong component of it is through social media and mass media campaign through social media. But then again, a couple years ago when mHealth was getting all the attention, again, that silver bullet, we gotta be careful, it's part of the systems, right? And is it backed by evidence, and how should we use social media to engage girls? And we want to avoid elite capture. Social media does not reach every girl in every community that are vulnerable. So we have to avoid elite capture and use different ways to reach girls.
Thank you. So if you can answer President Banda the question that was asked, and then if you can include the one, how do we influence the witch doctors? I think you gave me an example earlier how you did your maternal death program and how you were very successful. I think it will be good for people to hear that too.
Thank you. I think, let me start with the lady from Cameroon. I don't know if you know about breast tiny. That's happening in Cameroon, where 10-year-olds, by the time their breasts start coming out, they bend them to bring them in so that they're not sexual. You know that. You can Google it. So there's a project already waiting for you to start from. Number two, I just wanted you to know that there's a girl who lives here. She went back to Cameroon when she was, I'm very proud of her. She went back to Cameroon when she was 7 years old with her mother and found that girls of her age were going to school with books in plastic bags. She asked her mother, why don't they have shoes and bags? And the mother said they don't have. She came back, went to her class, raised 50 bags. From that time, she distributes now to 35 countries, including the Joyce Banda Foundation, and she's 13 years old. So I want to agree with Doris when they said that we can begin to identify young leaders and build them now. I think one answer is for us to increase the number of leaders on the continent, as many leaders as possible. And because I find that when women get into leadership, they focus more on issues that affect women and children. When I became president, I appointed the first Chief Justice in Malawi, a female, head of civil service, a female. Sometimes the three of us would sit and discuss matters of state, the three of us, women there, having a cup of tea, running Malawi. And I also appointed the first Solicitor General, 2 governors of the Reserve Bank, 8 district commissioners, and 100 appointments. When women get into leadership, they appoint fellow women. And then I would like to agree with our distinguished panel that then you have that critical mass, then those are role models because the young girls are looking at those. Number 2, I think rights education is very important. I want to emphasize that a girl child, a boy child, from the age of 3 to by the time that child is 9, must know her rights. And so we must start early in schools. Number 4 is education. I have found that when you go to school, you get educated. Like in my case, I come from a tradition that really believes in initiation and things like that. No initiation not once. At 9, at 14, when you have a baby, you go back to the bush. But the moment you get educated, that's the end of that curse. My daughters don't even know this happens in my community. My daughters, I have got 9 children. 5 of those are daughters. They don't even know what's going on in our community in Domas because they grew up in town, and out of the 9 children, 8 are graduates, 5 of them with master's degrees, 1 of them a medical doctor. So we've done well. They don't go back home. So education is very critical and very important. When we educate the girl child, then we will stop this curse. And finally, to encourage girls to speak out. I was watching TV one time, and it was a workshop of chiefs. They had just had a workshop on HIV/AIDS. They were denying on TV that they don't do the cleansing program anymore. When a girl child who was sitting there said, "You are lying, but you did that to me last year." I was Minister of Women and Children. I traveled there with the police the next day to arrest them. When I got there, and she was right, it's not the right thing is not to arrest them. They just go under. So when I got there, I asked this 9-year-old, "Tell me your story." She said, because to her, this is what everybody must go through, and if I don't go through, there's something wrong with me. She said, "My mother died, so my aunt found me this man to sleep with me." She was 9, the man was maybe 40 years old. But because she couldn't afford the $3, she asked this man to sleep with me and my 4-year-old so that we all both grow with beautiful skin. But the man after me refused to sleep with my 4-year-old. But Mommy, I'm surprised because I have scabies and she has smooth skin. So I knew straight away she had been infected. So by the time we got there, we mobilized the girls with the help of the Hunger Project, formed a club of these girls. Now they are a powerful club that goes telling other girls that it is okay to speak, because they are told, if you say this to anybody, your mother shall die. They tell them, they intimidate them. But the moment there's a group that can speak, then they go and influence fellow girls to speak. And then you begin this, and when I was Minister of Women, I even appointed child protection officers. So they live in the village. So these children, girls, every Saturday, they have children's corner where they can go and tell each other what is happening to them. So there's so much we can do, and we can reach the village, and we can sensitize the children to speak out and tell them nothing will happen, your mother will not die. Which doctors? Which doctors are the most difficult to change? The most difficult to change. And it is because they make, So I think what we need to do as government is what has happened in other countries is that they're within the laws, they make sure that some of the things they do are criminalized. But it's a very, very difficult sector to deal with. I think for me, my urgent need right now is research to find out what exactly is going on and to make sure that we mobilize communities to work with us and mobilize support, but to also ensure that the girls can speak out. Because in Ghana, when the Trokosh, when these girls are taken and given to the priest at 10 years old, they don't know that they can say no. So they are given up. The government passed a law in 1998 against it. Nobody cares, nobody listens. In Malawi, we passed a law against marriage before 18. But the girl then leaves primary school at 10 or 12. You expect her that girl child to stay until she's 14 without getting married. Then you make sure that child goes to school. So it's a holistic approach that we must take. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. I have a stop sign in front of me. Stop sign.
That means 3 more minutes.
But I really, because it's a critical point, there's so much advancement of women and girls that has really gone into this, not forgetting I'm in the US. The Obama administration had just elevated the girls. So everywhere you hear, it's the girls. So I want to ask the panels, just 5 seconds. What advice would you give to a new administration regarding girls and adolescents? We have elections in November, so we have to see what would you tell the next president of the US?
Can I take 30 seconds? Maybe not 5. So
30 seconds, yes.
Okay, so Dr. Banda said already, and I think I would be remiss if I didn't say this, more research. we have to do more research to really understand what works. More long-term cross-sectoral programming. We're starting to see some movement in that direction from the US government. The Youth Power program that USAID has committed to spending up to $500 million over 5 years for cross-sectoral positive youth development programming, ideally with gender at the core, and I think that needs to be more integrated in the coming years, and really needs to be something that across our government we recognize the need to break down the silos between the sectors that have been set up over the years. I also want to commend the UK government and DFID. Rosanna mentioned the Gender and Adolescence Global Evidence Program, GAGE. It's a 9-year investment by the UK government in understanding what works to support girls in low and middle income countries. That's huge because we know change can happen somewhat quickly, but really we need that long-term period throughout a girl's adolescence to understand what works best at different times in her life. And there's so much more that I could say, but we have a panel on policy coming up. I'll just leave it at, if we have a feminist president, we, the United States, really can become, again, a global leader for women, girls, and gender equality. And I think all of us need to work hard to ensure that that happens within the administration, within Washington more broadly, and globally, in support and collaboration with the UN and other countries.
Thank you.
Well, I think the next president might understand the issue of women and girls more than I do. Well, I think the current commitment need to be continued within the into the next administration. So, and then I think one of the again with Suzanne, because we're both researchers, is that we think that investment needs to be guided by research and evidence that put girls at the center. We need to take a multi-sectoral approach to implement growth center programs. And then I really advocate that we need to make long-term investment. Again, that 0 all the way to 18 years of age is important. And we cannot be short-sighted and investing in 3-5 years program of work anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've come a long way, and we could look at the commitments of the Adolescent Girl Strategy as well as our GBV strategy, and so holding accountable our government counterparts for strategies that have already been set aside would be amazing. But I really take to heart your points about the 0 to 10, and I think we need to call on our governments to think about more holistic, gender-focused programming for children below the age of 10. So in that case, most of our programming from the US government is pretty sectoralized, if I can say it that way. So how can we improve the way we think about a gendered focus for children 0 to 10? That's a challenge for all of us, perhaps.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and amazing individuals here who are doing a great work. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Toa. Thank you, Doris. I think, today maybe we referred a lot about Africa, but I just wanted to end to say that this is not just girls in Africa. It's girls around the world, including here in Washington, D.C. So we really have to go forward. I know Susan keeps saying we don't even know what works, but I think we have made some progress in what is working. We just need to figure out how do we improve on it, how do we scale it up. I asked that scaling question because that's where I'm struggling with now. I have a great program, it's working, but how do I take it to every village in Kenya? So, and I think that's where really we go forward. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this. Give this amazing panel some claps. Thank you. Thank you.
Now is it on? Yeah, okay. Thank you again to our excellent panel and moderator and President Banda for her contributions. I'm Megan O'Donnell. I'm the Gender and Development Program Coordinator here at CGD. We are so happy to have all of you for the 3rd year running. I have the pleasure of introducing our next 2 speakers who will be presenting UNFPA's State of the World's Population Report for this year. Sarah Craven currently serves as the director of UNFPA's Washington, D.C. office. Prior to her work there, she worked at the State Department and also on the legislative staffs for 2 U.S. senators. Sarah was also a policy advisor to the Center for Development and Population Activities for the 1994 International Conference on Population and the 1995 Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing. She has a BA from Macalester, an MPhil from Cambridge, and a law degree from Georgetown, where she was a public interest law scholar. Lyric Thompson is currently the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the International Center for Research on Women, a co-chair of Girls Not Brides USA, and a committee member for a number of other organizations, including the Civil Society Working Group on Women, Peace, and Security, and the Coalition to End Gender-Based Violence Globally. Lyric previously served as the primary expert and strategist for Amnesty International's Women's Human Rights Program and as Senior Policy Manager for Women International. She is also the co-author of a chapter of this year's State of the World's Population Report. And on that note, I'll turn it over to Sarah and Lyric. Sarah's going to be providing an overview of the report, and then in light of the report's findings, Lyric will discuss an action agenda going forward. Please join me in welcoming them.
Okay. All right. I don't know if there's a timer. I was going to time myself because I want to give Lyric most of the time here. But let's see.
The action agenda is short.
Oh, that's worrying. Or achievable maybe then. Hi, I just want to first start out by saying thank you so much to letting us have this serendipity moment. Lena from IWHC had come up to me and she said, "Oh, I'm very worried that, we're doing our Girls Summit on the day of your report launch." And I was like, that is perfect. So we are so thrilled to have a report that is perfectly synergistic with this amazing event today. And I have to say, Rachel Moynihan, who's taking a picture right now, who in my office, you're seeing the entire DC office here, all two of us, and Gabby, our intern, all three of us. But we just pinch ourselves. How many times do you get to be in an event with Dr. Joyce Banda, with Kakenya Intaya, with that panel, and get to then present a report? This is a pretty good day. So thank you so much. So here we have the State of the World Population. This report is being released globally today. It was released at, 9 a.m. this morning in London, and we're having launches all around the world. Now, I don't know if I have a clicker, or is there someone going to click for me?
I heard there was a clicker. It looks like this might be it.
Aha, okay. So here's the face of the future. And why does this report talk about 10-year-old girls? Why not 10-year-old boys? I think my son would ask that question. Or why not a 15-year-old girl? But the face of a 10-year-old girl today is the face of our future. A girl who was 10 in 2015, when world leaders endorsed the 17 new Sustainable Development Goals, will be 25 when those goals are to have been achieved. World leaders agreed that the new development agenda should lead to inclusive, equitable progress that leaves no one behind. But every year, millions of girls are left behind, already at age 10 when adolescence begins, but especially as puberty approaches. As puberty, girls may cease being seen as girls and start being seen as commodities that can be bought, sold, or traded for marriage, as childbearers, or as free labor. It is at puberty that untold number of girls see their prospects for a healthy, productive life as independent, capable people fade and thrust into a collision course for denied opportunities, diminished capacities, violated rights, poverty, and unrealized potential. So, in 2030, can the Sustainable Development Goals really be achieved if millions are left behind? So here's our Executive Director, Dr. Babatunde Oshitumen, and he is making the point that a 10-year-old girl's life trajectory will be the true test whether the 2030 agenda is a success or failure. It is really on us as a global community to really make that investment. And when you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, this report really makes the case that they cannot be achieved if large swaths of humanity are unable to exercise their rights and realize their full potential. Okay, so here we go. We're 10. What do we know today about the cohort of 10-year-old girls? First of all, we know that they are a number of about 60 million. The region with the largest cohort, I don't know, it might be hard to see, maybe you can see on the sides, but the largest cohort is Asia and Pacific, and that's about half of the world's total, largely because that region includes India and China, the countries with the world's largest and second largest population. 9 in 10 of these 10-year-old girls live in less developed countries. One of the most striking facts about this cohort is that more than half of the world's 10-year-old girls live in countries with high levels of gender inequality. This means that about 35 million girls are entering adolescence with a fundamental disadvantage and about to face a series of obstacles that boys will not encounter on their way to adulthood. So, for example, child labor rates are higher in countries where there are larger cohorts of 10-year-old girls. 10% of 5 to 14-year-old girls do more than 28 hours of household chores per week, twice that of boys. 3 in 4 girl laborers are unpaid. Girls with large cohorts of girls also tend to be poorer. This suggests that a large number of 10-year-old girls are in countries where resources for basic human capital investments, such as education and health, may be stretched. Other data about today's 10-year-old girls are concentrated in Chapter 2 of the report, but appear in other chapters, such as Chapter 3 on obstacles to girls' path through adolescence into adulthood. And I should have pointed out, there are reports outside, so you can take one home. I don't think we have enough for everyone, but they are online. You can also download it, and if there's for some reason you don't get a report, see me or Rachel and we can get you one as well. Because it's always better to, and especially the pictures of the stories of the girls are in this report. So the obstacles on the path to adulthood, I mean, we've been talking about these, and we'll continue to talk about these. You all know them well. They are impediments to her health and well-being, her susceptibility to violence, physical violence, sexual violence, harmful practices, her limited access to education, economic obstacles, such as lower participation in the labor force, and uneven protection of her human rights. This is a chart showing that the out-of-school children of primary age by region and sex, and of course girls, and you can see sub-Saharan Africa on the bottom is the biggest gap. And here we have for secondary school. Oops, back. Okay, now this graph I think is one of the most telling in the report, and I hope you can see it, but here is about the bottom 40% of the girls are often the most excluded from the benefits of global development investments. And so if you can see there on the very bottom is the critical bottom 40% of girls are completely shut off. But even if we look at the better off girls, you can see they're only having access to health and secondary school and all the far more options that boys have at their fingertips. So when we do our future investments, we have to really think to make sure that they reach every girl, including the poorest ones. But overall, girls have a fraction of access to resources to what boys do. So that graph is on page 43 of your report. The next chapter is on how timely investments in the health and education of today's 10-year-old girls can fuel economic growth and boost the overall well-being of nations. When girls have the opportunity to obtain their full potential as individuals, their countries will benefit immensely. Countries that fail to support their 10-year-old girls may experience economic stagnation. And the report really dives into the mechanism called the demographic dividend to explore the link between girls' education and well-being and the economic growth of their country. So this is a key factor. Investing in 10-year-old girls not only impacts and improves the lives of that girl, but also her family, community, and nation. So she's an incredible resource for economic growth and development. So there are data in the report that shows a dramatic example of this demographic dividend in action in the comparison between East Asia and the Pacific and sub-Saharan Africa in the late 20th century. In 1975, sub-Saharan Africa had a higher per capita GDP than East Asia Pacific. However, because fertility dropped in Asia at a far higher rate than in Africa, Asia's ratio of working age to non-working age individuals increased dramatically, fueling a corresponding increase in GDP per capita. By 2010, Asia's per capita GDP was nearly triple that of Africa. Now this is a hard slide to see, but on page 55 of the report, and I think there's another thing that's really interesting, is that it gives an assumption of two paths of a girl, a fictional Indian girl named Gayatri, and it just shows her life based on when investments are made and when she has an opportunity to delay childbirth, to have access to education, to delay early marriage, how much better off her individual life is as the well of her life of her family and community compared to if she is not given those opportunities. And I think you can tell this story in almost every part of the world. I had dinner with Kenya last night, and she was telling a very moving story of two African Kenyan girls in her own school, one who's in her school and one who isn't, and the dramatic input and output of those lives. Or even Kenya herself when she goes back and sees her peers who seem much older, much weaker than Kenya is. So it's the two paths, the road not taken or the road taken. So this is a chart that shows the investment on path 1 and path 2. So echoing our last panel, the next chapter in the report really focuses on what has worked so far to empower 10-year-old girls to realize their full potential. And again, these are a lot of the interventions that we've already been discussing: education, health information and services, addressing child marriage, protection from gender-based violence, engaging parents and communities, ensuring that comprehensive sex ed is effective and scalable and accessible, ensuring that girls have access to quality, accessible, and age-appropriate sexual and reproductive health services, empowering girls with information skills, supporting married girls. One of the things about this report, when you read the stories about the 10 girls that are featured from all over the world, they all want bicycles, they all have bicycles, they want their brother's bicycle, but they all have a love for bicycles. And I think one thing that we really focus on about when you're 10, you're at that cusp where everything is possible, where every dream can be realized, where everything is still new and fresh. Girls often don't at that point see that there's a big difference between them and boys. And that's the beginning of where a girl can soar or where she can go down a precipitous cliff. And I think these pictures of these girls, every one of them has a dream. Every one of them has a hope. All of them are filled with laughter and joy. And it's really an incredible moment for the global community to ensure that they can be invested in and successful. So ensuring that girls' human rights are met, that they have equal opportunities, protection from risk, a fair share of resources, visibility in numbers, and support from those around her. I think all of us can agree that the idea of role models, to have supportive members of your community, can make a huge difference in the lives of girls. And the report ends with 10 essential actions for the 10-year-old girl. And are you going to talk about these, Lyric? I'll leave the slides up. So I'm just so happy. I mean, how lucky we were at UNFPA to have Lyric and her colleagues at ICRW, Jeff and Rachel, contribute to this report. So as I said, the synergy of us all coming together. So I'm going to turn it over to one of our authors, and I get to bask in her glow. So I'm going to turn it to you, Lyric.
Thank you, Sarah. I think it's basking in your glow, but we can be a mutual appreciation society up here. Okay, so I think if you read one chapter of this report, it should obviously be the obstacles chapter because that's the one that Rachel and I wrote. But if you read 2 chapters in this report, you should absolutely read the recommendations chapter, which is fittingly at the end. And I think, we're going to top line them for you here. I really encourage you to read the full text because there's some really interesting ideas that the report plays with that are a lot more detailed and interesting than what you'll see here. So certainly, I think we all agree that legal change is a necessary first step. It's not a silver bullet, but absolutely until you have birth certificates, until you have marriage certificates, until you have equal inheritance, property rights, etc., age of marriage laws that recognize that is something adults should enter into with free and full consent, that we've still got a long way to go. A special call out here, which I'm pleased about and maps well, of course, with our Sustainable Development Goals agenda on ending harmful practices, especially and including FGM and child marriage, high quality education,
We get a separate call out for comprehensive sexuality education. You'll all be pleased. We've heard that a lot so far today. And in one part of the report, it recommends that that happen no later than 10, because as we know, many of the interventions of this type just aren't available, but if they are, they often don't start till around 12, and that can simply be too late for some girls. Working towards universal health care, institute a 10-year-old mental and physical health checkup for all girls, and then positive policy frameworks, rigorous and systematic focus on inclusion across everything. Where there has been services and policy provisions for girls, there has been a focus on the health and education sectors, as Sarah already showed you. That's where the girls that we are touching, it's probably in those two sectors. At one point in the recommendations, it says, no, everyone needs to embrace gender budgeting, which is the next piece, investments, across all sectors, not just those that we're already starting to look at girls. We're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about transportation, we're talking about all of these issues that touch girls' lives as well. And then very importantly, a call out for mobilizing new funds, particularly for mental health, which is an emerging area, #1 killer of girls 15 to 19 globally, and protection for unpaid work and the disproportionate time burdens that girls face. And that doesn't go anywhere when they become women, as we know. Data, certainly echoing the call for a more intentional review of data for girls. Particularly, I think the value of the report being in honing in on the very young adolescents, seeing, as Jeff, who's my colleague at ICRW who wrote the data chapter, says, the data's actually crap. He couldn't write that, but we really do need more data is needed, as Suzanne said, to understand what's really going on for these girls. There's good reasons that we don't have that data. There's special protections that need to be taken when we're talking about collecting information from young girls, particularly when it pertains to violence or sexual activity, coerced or not. And then finally, norm change. I was also at the dinner last night that Sarah was mentioning, and Jeff kind of closed the evening for us talking about the importance of everyone having a role to play in norm change and this opening up of opportunities for girls that Sarah mentioned already, that anything is possible at 10. And then what happens when those investments aren't made and intentionally structured. I thought that was incredibly powerful, particularly to come from a leading male demographer who's thinking about demography, not about population control, but about opening rights, opening opportunities, and agency for girls. So with my thanks to Sarah for the comprehensive overview of the report, just a couple points on what our action agenda is today. I'd like to say that we've already seen phenomenal response in terms of journalists covering this report. Data really often is a first step, whether it's for policymakers, whether it's for journalists. We've had The Guardian, Reuters, Daily Mail already with the London launch, and I'm sure there's a lot more to come here in the US. So I guess my question for all of us is what we can commit to do today with this report as a tool, because I do believe that it gives us a tool. At ICRW, we really care about research with impact. And so I've already fielded some responses from the State Department to have briefings on the report, which is good. And that's coming not just from the Global Women's Issues Office, which is one of my favorite offices, but it's also important to have everybody else at the State Department understand that girls exist and have special needs and rights and what we can do for them. Also, the importance of telling the positive story. I think Sarah beautifully pointed to what we have in a resource of these 10 girls' stories. We have to look them in the eyes and keep our promises to them and explain to them when they're 25 at the end of this framework, what have we done with each of our niche that we occupy in this movement to make sure that this is not a dream deferred for them, to make sure that they finish school, they transition to secondary school, they learn about their bodies, they learn how to exercise their voices and articulate their rights, and are able to enjoy a future that is their right, but is also highly more just and prosperous place for all of us to be. So all of that and more can be found in here. I think my personal commitment in terms of taking the action agenda forward is going to revolve very much around where our next panel discussion is about to take us, which is what the US government can do, and also the UN, to honor these commitments. We have two big transitions coming up here, certainly in Washington. We have not only the president, but every post that gave us the gender architecture that we have today, including the girl strategy, which is my favorite strategy. And then we also have the Secretary Generals turning over in the UN as well. And as Ambassador Power said this week, among his many qualifications is not being a woman. So what space does that open for us to say that there needs to be a women's rights and a girls' rights agenda at the UN? So if I can just invite you to take the copies of the report, to share those online, and to think very intentionally about what you're going to do with it for these girls. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Hi, I'm Gayatri Patel. I'm the Senior Policy Advocate for Gender and Empowerment at CARE USA. I'm so pleased to be up here to introduce our next panel, but first I want to say thank you to Lyric and Sarah for sharing their amazing report. This is a huge win, and I for one, plan to read not just one or two chapters, but the whole thing from cover to cover. So thank you to them. I also want to thank Dr. Banda and the earlier panel for their remarks and for examining what we as a community see as the next frontier for programs and research. We certainly heard a lot about the need for research, the need for addressing social norms, the need for engaging youth and investing in the next generation. So I hope we can discuss that a little bit more. But with this backdrop in mind, we're now going to turn to how the US government is and should be playing a role in advancing these efforts globally. Over the past few years, we've seen positive expansion in the US government's focus on adolescent girls. Successes such as the girl strategy that we've talked about a bit so far, the Let Girls Learn initiative that's promoted access for girls' education, commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals and their emphasis on ending child marriage are all demonstrations that the Obama administration takes seriously its commitment to leading for girls globally. The cornerstone of these efforts really is that girls matter, that their voices should be heard, that their opinions on issues that affect them count, and that being empowered to achieve their aspirations is something that benefits themselves, their families, and their communities. But despite the advances being made, it's clear that girls around the world still face an uphill battle, whether it's living a life free from violence or having the ability to choose if, when, and whom to marry, having meaningful access to education, livelihoods, and comprehensive health and sexuality education and services, or simply to have their voices valued and heard. The next administration is in a position to continue the strides made by the current administration to expand opportunities for girls and to empower them to step up as the valuable members of communities that they are. So our next panel, and I would like to invite them to come up. Here they are, sorry. You're lurking in the corner. Our next panel will examine the successes and challenges of the Obama administration in leading for girls and put forth some recommendations for how the next administration can take this mantle forward. We have a well-rounded panel moderated by Dr. Daniela Leggero, CEO of Together for Girls, a global public-private partnership dedicated to ending violence against children, particularly ending sexual violence against adolescent girls. She's joined by Helena Minshew, Caitlin Horrigan, and Andrea Bertone. Helena Minshew is a program officer for the International Women's Health Coalition and one of the fearless leaders of the Girls Not Brides USA coalition. She provides strategic direction for IWHC's U.S. foreign policy portfolio, including advocacy and analysis around U.S. government initiatives to empower adolescent girls and end child marriage. Caitlin Horrigan joins us from the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, where she serves as the Associate Director for Global Advocacy. Caitlin's government advocacy work centers on advancing funding and policies that support international family planning and reproductive health. She also serves as a senior resource on sexual and reproductive health and rights. And finally, we have Dr. Andrea Bertone, Director of FHI 360's Gender Department. With over 20 years of international development and research experience, Dr. Bertone provides strategic, programmatic, and technical leadership on FHI 360's work related to women and girls. So please join me in welcoming the panel.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Yay, this is great. Thank you so much. Wow, this has been such a great day already, and I'm delighted to be here with this amazing panel. But before I do this and start into this panel, since Lyric invited us to make some commitments, I just wanted to say publicly, this idea of not having enough violence data when it comes to girls is a huge issue. And so I want to say that we at Together for Girls are actually doing with CDC national surveys of violence against children. We have 10 countries. In the next 2 years, we'll be at 22. And we are going to do a much better job at kind of using those data, translating those data, and really looking at adolescent girls, early adolescence, and how violence is progressing. And so there are going to be a series of pieces you'll see coming out over the next year because it's absolutely critical that we do more on that. So I think Lyric is gone, but I've made my commitment. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the administration and the US. And so I think I'm going to start with you, Lena. And why don't you tell us a little bit about what the Obama administration has been able to achieve when it comes to focusing on girls and empowering them? What do you think they've done well?
Yeah, I think that from everyone so far, you may have the sense that the Obama administration has done quite a bit for girls, and they've got a couple fans here in the audience and on the stage. I think what is actually true is that the Obama administration has probably done more for girls than any other administration that we've seen before. And that's obviously in terms of funding and looking at different programs. But perhaps the most important thing that they've been able to do is kind of shift their thinking about how they view girls. So girls aren't a problem to be solved, and they're definitely no longer a problem to be solved in sectors. So we got to figure out their education over here and their health over here. But they see girls as the whole beings that they are, and that the solutions can't be piecemeal anymore. And I'd say that that's probably the key to all of the work that the Obama administration has been able to do since doing the big things like starting the White House Council on Women and Girls and creating the Office of Global Women's Issues. Because they've been able to have President Obama go around the world and speak without caveat that girls need to be educated, empowered, safe. They need to be free from child early and forced marriage. And he's been able to go and say that he's a feminist proudly, which is something that every little girl and boy, not just here in the States, but around the world needs to hear, that a powerful, perhaps the most powerful person in the world is a feminist, believes that men and women are equal. And it means that the Obama administration can do things like write the US Global Strategy to empower adolescent girls. And I fully agree with President Banda that they should be commended for that strategy. It was launched earlier this year, as I'm sure most of you know. And again, it's a way that the administration has looked at girls comprehensively. So it's not just education, it's not just health, it's everything. And I don't think that this is just the first US strategy that does that. I think it's the first strategy from a government anywhere to do that. And that's huge. That can completely change the way that the rest of the world looks at girls as well. And with the emphasis coming from the very top, it enables the programs and the different agencies to also take on adolescent girls. So we've seen the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief launch their Dreams Initiative. The First Lady has worked with Peace Corps, USAID, the State Department. Recently, the Department of Labor and USDA came on for the Let Girls Learn initiative. And that kind of shift from it's got to be the Office of Global Women's Issues to it can be anyone in the administration working for girls is, again, something that's critical to how the Obama administration has taken on this issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's dig a little deeper then, because you mentioned two particular initiatives that have really tried to do that, right? To take that comprehensive approach and maybe fill some gaps that were there before. And let's turn to you, Caitlin, because Dreams is one of them, and you know that is a very ambitious program. I was actually in PEPFAR and helped put it together, and it was meant to be ambitious. I mean, that was the idea. What's your sense of how much it's really achieved? And also maybe talk a little bit about what it hasn't achieved. So I think not only what the positive parts have been, but are there some things that maybe it set out to do and didn't really do?
Sure. Thanks, Danielle, and thanks for your role in kickstarting Dreams. I think for those of you who aren't as familiar with Dreams, Dreams stands for Determined, Resilient, Empowered, AIDS-Free, Mentored, and Safe. So you can see why we like the acronym in that one. But it was a PEPFAR initiative that was launched on World AIDS Day in 2014, and the aim was really to reduce HIV incidence among adolescent girls and young women aged 15 to 24 in 10 sub-Saharan African countries, which were some of the most impacted areas. And because you just heard a lot about 10-year-olds, I should say, even though the goal is to reduce incidence among the 15 to 24 set, there's a real understanding that we obviously need to start earlier in order to see the impact. So 10-year-olds are certainly part of the program's target. And I think the initiative grew out of a recognition that we cannot leave women and girls behind if we're going to make true progress. And I think the ambassador and critical folks like Daniela, when they looked at the data, realized that despite overall progress in the epidemic, when you drilled down and looked at the data by sex and age, you saw huge disparities. And so I think, clearly this program is sort of aimed at a response to the data and what we're hearing from girls themselves and what we heard from the data. In terms of the impact, I think, and the implementation, I think on the front end, I'd just say that it's gone slower than I think most of us would have liked. And I think my colleagues from PEPFAR would agree. They would have liked to see faster implementation. For those of you who know Ambassador Burke, she's a very ambitious and driven person who always wants more and faster. So I think that's been a frustration, just government moves slowly. And so the money was slow, getting the country buy-in was slow. But I would highlight, I think, a few core elements that are part of Dreams that gives me a lot of optimism for the impact that I think we will see within the 2-year time frame and hopefully beyond, and that are elements that I think would be well served to be replicated in other US government programs that are aimed at adolescent girls and young women. So that is the ambitious goals. And I know even though the ambitious goals make people nervous, I think you can't underestimate the power of the Obama administration for the first time ever committing a goal to reduce HIV incidence among adolescent girls and young women. And I think we've seen on AIDS treatment the power of ambitious goals to drive programmatic focus, to drive resources, to drive political will. And I think a program like Dreams and the girls that it's meant to serve will really benefit from that ambition and clear goal. Thankfully, it's not an unfunded mandate. There's new resources behind that goal. So $385 million from PEPFAR and its private sector partners. And I think critically within that, there's money for new innovative creative approaches through the Innovation Challenge Fund. And of course, new money is meaningless if it's not spent well. So I think you've heard a lot about evidence-based, multi-sectoral approaches, and that is the approach that PEPFAR is trying to take with Dreams. I think it's looking at a core package of interventions that are based on evidence, that are multi-sectoral, and that really look at the structural drivers. So beyond the health sphere, looking at issues of poverty, of access to education, of violence against girls, of gender inequality, to think holistically. And from our perch, hugely excited that it finally at last includes access to adolescent-friendly sexual and reproductive health services, violence prevention. The last two that I'll highlight are civil society engagement, which I think is critical to the success of Dreams, and any initiative that's meant to reach a population, they have to be included in the conversation. I think that's still probably an area of a work in progress. There's room for improvement in terms of meaningful and sustainable engagement, but I have seen a very genuine effort, I think, to be deliberate about having girls and women at the table and to think a recognition that we've failed them in the past, and so we need to talk outside our normal spheres if we're going to make a difference moving forward. And then the final thing I'll say is that I think Ambassador Burke's personal commitment and that senior level political leadership, for those of you who have been at events with her in DC, but also spaces like the International AIDS Conference, she doesn't only speak about women and girls when she's in a room of friends like this, but she brings that prioritization to all the spaces that she's in. And I think that kind of signal from the top of an office is really powerful in terms of implementing at the mission level, for implementers, for other areas of government. And so I think those are some of the key dimensions that give me a lot of hope for the future of Dreams, and hopefully we'll get some good impact come World AIDS Day, and I think are key elements that could be replicated in other programs.
Great. You know, I was thinking about, as you were saying, it's being in government, I mean, this sense of steering the Titanic, right? So
yeah.
It's a big machine. Yeah. It takes a little time. So that's really great. Thanks, Caitlin. Let's turn over to you now, Andrea, and talk a little bit about the other initiative I think that's gotten a lot of attention, especially over the last year. Just International Day of the Girl was a couple weeks ago, last week. And there was a lot on Let Girls Learn, and you know, the focus that the First Lady has had there, so many, you know, places she's visited, the talks she's made. So really this public kind of voice for the importance of girls' education. I wonder though, from the perspective of actual program implementation and on the ground impact, what's your sense of what's really shifted and what's changed in terms of what the US government is doing? And I think both for primary but also for secondary education for girls.
Great. Well, thank you, and thanks, Lena, and for the Center for Global Development for inviting me to speak today. So first, I want to say that Let Girls Learn, I think, has been this amazing investment, but also commitment from the U.S. government on girls' education. And when it was first announced, there was a lot of excitement about it. If you've been around for a while working on girls' education, then you know that the U.S. government was making a lot of commitments to girls' education and investments from the late 1990s to around 2011. And then it kind of dropped off a little bit. The education strategy of USAID changed. And even though there were still programs that were being implemented and funded, there wasn't the same level of commitment. So But let's not forget that the changes in the US government that have refocused us on girls and gender issues was because Hillary Clinton coming in as Secretary of State under the first Obama administration. And of course, I'm channeling her today. The white suit. So I'm very proud of her. So when Let Girls Learn was announced last year in March 2015, I think there was, again, a renewed level of excitement to say, wow, okay, yes, we need to be looking at girls' education. At the beginning of this, it was, I think, an effort for this whole of government approach to look at what was already being invested. So it was an opportunity for USAID and for the State Department and for Peace Corps and MCC to say, you know what, we actually are making investments in girls' education. So it was kind of packaging what was already being invested. And many, frankly, in the development community were wondering if there was going to be a new commitment of funding. So in fact, there has been, and it's exciting to see the requests from the President's office for new money in fiscal year 17. I think that what Let Girls Learn has been able to do is also to take a look at the issues not only in girls' education that the U.S. government has been investing in, but other issues as well. For example, HIV prevention, for example, investing in countering violent extremism, addressing gender-based violence, school-related gender-based violence, and linking adolescent girls much more closely to those issues to see how girls are affected by those issues and how empowering girls can make a dent in those really serious social issues. So I would say that the commitment, you know, the global commitment to girls at the primary level has been going on for many, many years. I think what we're seeing now is a recognition on a much more global scale, led with a very strong commitment by the US government, that adolescent girls and making sure that their transition is happening from primary to secondary school is one of the most important sectors of the population at the global level that we can be paying attention to, because we know the evidence that we've seen that investing in these young women are going to reap social and economic and health benefits for them, their families, and their societies, their communities. But I think that if we're going to look at measures of success, then we need to wait a little bit longer to see what, how the money that's being invested is actually going to make a difference in the lives of the girls and also in the communities where these programs are being implemented.
Great. I'm going to contradict myself a little, because previously I said sometimes the US government can be like the Titanic, but then there's also the reality of when an administration changes, a lot can be undone. And sometimes pretty quickly, depending on what the new administration believes. And so, I remember, when we were working on Dreams and PEPFAR, really always thinking about what are the kinds of things we can do and put in place that are more difficult to then undo, because you never know what's going to happen. And so I know that within the government, a lot of people think that way, but I'm wondering, and actually this is a question for all of you, but we'll start with you, Lena. What are the kinds of things that you think have already been put in place that will allow this agenda to continue in one way or another? And what are some of the things that the administration might do once, in this kind of last bit of time that could help secure some of those gains?
Yeah, we talk a lot about the U.S. global strategy to empower adolescent girls and how much we love it, but the reality is it's a late in the administration strategy, and that can make it more difficult to really deeply embed the strategy and institutionalize it in a way that, like you said, means it can't be undone. I think even at the launch of the strategy, though, with Secretary Kerry saying immediately, we need to get this into the bones of our foreign policy work and our development work, really helped to show that the administration is serious about institutionalizing the strategy. Also, Department of Labor and USDA recently coming on board to Let Girls Learn also tells me that more agencies, more departments are starting to see their role in empowering adolescent girls. And once you get all of those agencies on board and you have a number of people steering that ship away from the iceberg, I think it becomes harder to turn it back the other direction. But there's obviously a number of things that this administration can do, even though it's only got a couple of months left. One thing that we didn't see with the strategy was an executive order that would give it the full force of the law. That kind of executive order did come with the GBV strategy and a couple of others. And since you all took a couple of hours out of your days today to be here, I assume you agree with me that this strategy deserves the same kind of official stamping by the very top. Also, when you're looking at the transition, it's important that those who are doing the transition memos and trying to educate the next group don't let this strategy get lost in the shuffle. And that means talking about what they've already done, obviously, but what's not been able to be achieved in terms of implementation. Again, it's a new strategy, so there's going to be a whole cohort of things that were unable to be achieved. And then, I know I talked about this earlier, but just making sure that the way that this administration is thinking about working with and for adolescent girls is so critical to pass on to the next group that's coming in. The work on indicators still needs to move forward. That can be really tedious and boring for certain types of people, but it's so critical. If everyone's going to be moving in the same direction, they need to know exactly what they're moving towards. So having really clear indicators on what they're going to achieve and how they're going to measure that kind of success is super important. And then finally, I come from a CSO, so you can imagine that I would be plugging this. But talking about how to ensure that CSO consultations and CSO involvement continue. I mean, you were talking about how Dreams made sure to bring in women and girls. I think a lot of the strength of the strategy, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a CSO, came from the fact that this administration was willing to reach out to the CSO community and take on our expertise and our advice, and really making sure that that relationship continues is going to be critical if we're actually going to get implementation of the strategy as strongly as it needs to be done.
You were talking about that data measurement can be boring. It is so important, right? I mean, one of the things I've started saying a few years ago is, if you have data, let's talk about data. If all we have are opinions, we're going to go with mine. And that's the risk, right?
Write that down really quick.
Have their opinions, and that's not necessarily where we want to go. So thank you for that, Lena. I think, Caitlin, let's switch over to you and maybe talk a little bit more about Dreams and what you think, in terms of kind of what can be done, or HIV in general, sexual reproductive health, not just Dreams.
Sure. Well, I think Dreams has done some smart things to, as you said, bake it into the institution and sort of the machinery of government so that it's harder to undone. And also if we see a leadership transition where they are supportive, but maybe there's a gap at a key agency, some of the work still happens while there's that gap. So I think some of the examples are around indicators that we're measuring programs. There's a certain amount of accountability to that. I think PEPFAR is also thinking about how to transition Dreams from the standalone initiative that it was and bake it into some of the more annual processes. So some of you may know the country operational planning process, the COP process, that happens annually at every country, and Dreams is now going to be more integrated into that process. So I think moving it from a standalone to something that happens with all the stakeholders will be really key to make sure it has a shelf life beyond this administration. I think some of the also urgent work that folks in government and those of us outside can do in the current months is thinking about documenting our successes, making sure we're crystal clear on what's working and telling that story in a really compelling way, and also what the unfinished business is, being honest about where we've fallen short and what a new administration could pick up and really seize and own as their own. And then finally, I think, and this is more of a mandate maybe for those of us on the outside, is coming in for a new administration with a really clear set of ambitious goals and an agenda that's shared and that we have a strategy for implementation, because I think there is a critical window from the November 9th when that transition team picks up and that first 100 days post-inauguration where a lot of action and change, as you said, happens. And I think being really forward-looking and coordinated, which is why I'm excited to be at a space like this, which was bringing together a bunch of stakeholders from different sectors who all care about adolescent girls, because I think if we can come in with a shared set of priorities, and I know I've talked to many of you in this room about what those could be, and I'm excited to talk to more of you. We've also been talking a lot to women around the world who are really on the front lines of experiencing the impact of shifts in US politics. So I think developing that shared agenda will also help us bake in and keep the forward momentum going.
Okay. What do you think, Andrea?
Well, I think that the gains that have been made will not immediately unravel with a new administration, regardless of who it is. But I think that this is where the positive side of how Let Girls Learn, for example, got started up was the multiple agencies of the US government taking a look at the investments that they were already making. So we can point to the commitments that had been there before these last year and a half of really big push on focus on adolescent girls, for example. There are many projects that are well into their second and third year working on adolescent girls. For example, FHI 360 has a project in the Democratic Republic of Congo called EAGLE, started in 2013. It will end in 2018. So this was clearly an investment that the USAID made years ago on adolescent girls' school-related gender-based violence, and adolescent reproductive health. And these were three key components of that project that's currently underway and having a lot of success. I think that we have to make sure that we don't get sucked into the leadership vacuum. After the new administration comes, we'll be waiting for many political appointments. So we want to make sure that the people who are working on this right now put transition plans in place that are transparent and that everyone knows what their role is. Of course, I know that's happening, but just to reiterate and recommend that the discussions around those transition plans be made open and public so that, again, members of the international development community, CSOs, CBOs, other stakeholders can be part of that transition process so we're not letting anything drop. And then, of course, the last thing I wanted to say was just to make sure that we don't only make this part, something that's primarily in the executive branch, but that we are continuing to advocate to Congress to meet those financial commitments or to to answer the president's requests for all of this new funding. I think that's really key is continuing to engage with members of Congress who can also help move this along from a political perspective, but also from a financial perspective.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to stay with you on that one because, if you look at kind of the global landscape and investment in terms of education and girls' education, given the impact that can have and all the data, decades of data we have to support how impactful that is, it's woefully unfunded, right? It's pretty inadequate. And it's exciting to see new requests for funding, but I'm wondering, moving forward, independent of, who wins the election, and we'll find out pretty soon, but what are some of the recommendations that you would have for that new administration around what's that next step for girls' education, in addition to just requesting more funding?
That's a great question. So I think that we can look to the partnerships and the engagement that the U.S. government has made on these issues around adolescent girls with other governments. So, for example, the British government is also making huge financial and political commitments to adolescent girls. They just also announced this past summer the Leave No Girls Behind initiative, which I think is very much in line with what the U.S. government wants to accomplish, and in fact may even be more ambitious because it's relying on partnerships as a key component of reaching girls who've been out of school and really bringing them back into the fold and making sure that they're getting literacy and numeracy, but also addressing some of the other social issues. I think my recommendation, this is personal and based on many years, over 15 years of implementing girls' education projects, is to perhaps rename what we call girls' education and call it gender equality in education. And this would reframe what we focus on. Now, of course, I'm a huge advocate of girls' education, and I'm a huge advocate of empowerment of girls, and I've seen firsthand the positive effects that girls have when we educate them, when we mentor them, when we provide them opportunities to transition from secondary school to employment opportunities. However, as others have said earlier today, we can't forget about boys. And we cannot forget about the social and gender norms in the communities that if we don't address, don't really change the environment dramatically so that these young women can grow up and their children can grow up in changed environments. So I really do believe my personal recommendation is to change and reframe the way we talk about girls' education to talking more about gender equality in education.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's especially interesting given that, when you start looking country by country or regionally, I mean, there are so many differences, right, when it comes to boys and girls, so beginning to really think about it that way. Yeah, that's great. Caitlin, what do you think? What are your recommendations when it comes to Dreams 2.0 or kind of our HIV programming for that next administration?
Sure. Well, I can't help but agree with Andrea too in terms of the funding ask. And I think, you have to say that up front. It is one of the president's first actions is submitting a new budget proposal to Congress. And I think it's an early signal about continuing to prioritize global health and really sets a high water mark, which then we advocate for Congress within sort of those limits of the president's budget. So I think thinking about not only a strong budget request for PEPFAR, but also the family planning and reproductive health program, knowing that the success of both are really key to delivering on the vision for DREAMS. But I think there are many things that the administration can also do to make sure that money is well spent. One example is I think the Office of the Global AIDS Coordinator could empower missions to use PEPFAR dollars to pay for contraceptives if access is an issue and other funding schemes aren't currently viable. So that's just one small change that I think they could make that would vastly improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the dollars that we are spending. I think a few other things that I would suggest to them is really to think about sustainability. And I think key to sustainability, and you heard Lena and I push on it, is that civil society engagement. So who are the new partners that have been brought in through the lens of DREAMS, and how can we make sure they're contributing to the overall success of PEPFAR and really taking it to other places, beyond just the 10 focus countries and target districts that DREAMS it is, but really scaling it up beyond. And getting more stakeholders bought in. I think we've seen exciting progress in South Africa, where the government of South Africa has actually taken DREAMS and said, we're happy that PEPFAR is doing it in these target districts, but we want to nationalize because we think all girls in our country deserve this DREAMS approach. And so hopefully that will be a model that might inspire other countries to take up a more robust approach and could be a leverage point for other donors like the Global Fund. And then finally, one thing I've been thinking about a lot is an untapped opportunity to use our diplomatic tools to advance the health and rights of women and girls. We have really great missions and ambassadors in countries around the world, and so they could be better advocates, I think, for the laws and policies to enable women and girls to have access to the information and services that they need. And that includes in investing in advocacy from civil society. So those are some of the ideas I think that a new administration could pick up.
Great. What do you think, Lena? I mean, in addition to HIV and education, are there other areas where you think you have recommendations?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that just last week we had the International Day of the Girl Child, and there was a flurry of information coming out of the Obama administration on that day. So there was a proclamation from the president and a fact sheet on Let Girls Learn, and the First Lady and the Second Lady and Vice President Biden all did different things to show that this administration cares about girls, and that emphasis cannot be lightened up on. We have to keep the emphasis on girls. So first and foremost, number one. The second thing is, and I mentioned it before, how we are thinking about girls needs to continue to be the same. And that frame of mind that girls are whole beings that have dreams and hopes and lives ahead of them that they should determine needs to be brought forward through all that we do. So obviously our development work, but also when we're going to the UN in the Sustainable Development Goals, when there are bilateral conversations between our leaders and leaders of other countries. That needs to continue. Let's pretend that President Obama does not sign an executive order in the next couple of months. I can imagine a day one where the signal from the next administration is that girls are the most important thing by having an executive order that gives the U.S. global strategy to empower adolescent girls the full force of law. That would be just an incredible signal to the world what the next administration is thinking. And then obviously DREAMS and Let Girls Learn and the other programs that we've put together have to continue. As we've said, all of this is going to require an incredible amount of funding. And that doesn't just mean that we need to have funding, again, from day one. The next president is going to have to fight for funding every single year. And we can't just think about how much, but who we're funding. Because while it's critical that we fund USAID and PEPFAR and all of the other agencies involved in the strategy and Let Girls Learn, we need to make sure that that money and the programs are getting to the girls on the ground and the civil society organizations in countries that are doing this work. If you were here last year for Girl Summit, the second annual Girl Summit, you heard from Denejo, who is an IWHC partner, and she was 15 years old when her parents came to her and said, you're going to go off and marry a 45-year-old man. And she said no. And she was the first person in her community to say no. Can you imagine being 15 and saying no to your parents, to your entire community, and to basically everything that you've ever known? Luckily, Denejo had another IWHC partner, the Association to Combat Violence Against Women, standing with her and saying no with her. But can you imagine the strength of the US government standing with her or standing with millions of other Denejos? I mean, that will change the world. So we need to make sure that we're really concentrating on that level of impact and funding all the way down.
Very inspiring. That's great. So I think we have a few minutes still. We're the organizers, yeah? About a few minutes for questions, yeah, from the audience? All right. And please, why don't we do this? We're going to take a couple of questions at a time. When you ask your question, please introduce yourself briefly as well. So let's start over here. Oh, you're just holding the mic, I thought, for someone. I thought you already had a question.
We covered everything.
Hi, Nora O'Connell from Save the Children, and just thank you to all the panelists. It was incredibly enlightening to hear your perspectives on this. And with two potential scenarios facing us, I think we can all imagine what the risks would be in a Trump administration. I'd be interested in hearing what you think are the risks of a Clinton administration when clearly this is an issue that's in her DNA, but in any scenario, things can go right and go wrong. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
Good. Any other questions? We have a couple more over here.
Hello, my name is Laura, and I don't think we should leave the summit today without addressing something that affects girls, every single girl and woman that is living today, and that's menstruation. So I guess my question is, there are already so many barriers to gender equality, and I personally believe that a girl and a woman's period shouldn't be another one of those barriers. So how do you guys know how the U.S. government specifically is working to address issues of menstruation, not only here but globally? And I guess maybe just to start that conversation would just be the tampon tax that exists in this country and around the world, and if you guys think that one day or maybe under the next presidential term, this will go away.
We'll take one more and then we'll go. Then we'll do a second round. Yeah. Right here.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Cindy Drakeman with Double X Economy. I largely focus on women's economic empowerment, but I believe all of these conversations are very relevant to each other. So my question is, we've talked a lot about what's happening in developing countries and sort of more stable environments, relatively speaking. What about the role of the United States government in advocating for women and girls in post-conflict environments? And what can be done to make sure that those who are often the ones left behind to rebuild are included in the conversations about how that happens?
Great. I'll let you all decide who wants to answer, and then we'll do another round. I think we have time. Let's see.
I mean, in terms of risks for any new administration, I think there's always the chance that the new administration is going to come in. Well, a new administration will come in with their own priorities. And that's why it's so important for all of us to continue to push for adolescent girls specifically to be one of those priorities, whether that's in a Trump or a Clinton administration. And again, not to harp on this, but again, the way that we're looking at these issues. So if we go back to gender-based violence over there, education over there, health here, we're going to miss the boat on this generation of girls to make sure that their whole lives are taken care of and they can move forward empowered, safe, healthy, happy. And so if we don't get that switch right, I think that we could take some significant steps backwards.
I'll build off that, and thanks, Nora, for the question. I think it's a smart one. I mean, one of the things, the risks I see is, you know, President Clinton would have a huge amount of power as president, but the people that surround her also matter a great deal, and who gets appointed or confirmed into various positions matters a lot. And reflecting back on her time at state, I think we sometimes experience where Secretary Clinton was in a strong place, but some of her staff was more cautious and wanted to protect her from herself on some of the issues that we care about. So making sure that there's staff up and down the line who will do those briefing memos, who will draft those speeches, who will not hold her back and will go all the places that she would and want to go, and her legacy shows it, I think will be critical. So thinking about how some of you maybe can get into the administration, how we can make sure we have the most friends possible up and down the chain. On the question on menstruation, it's definitely not my area of expertise, but I do think a program like DREAMS is thinking about the power of keeping girls in school and the benefits that that yields for HIV. And part of that analysis, I think, is looking at the reasons why girls drop out of school, whether that's an unintended pregnancy or lack of access to sanitary pads and tampons, you know, once a month. I think that's part of it. So I think definitely as we think more holistically, it sort of forces us to think about all the factors that are affecting girls' lives and choices.
Do you want to try for the other question or any of those?
I just wanted to comment also on the risk one. I agree with Lena and Caitlin. One other possible risk is that President Clinton herself puts the brakes on an overemphasis of girls and women, not wanting to appear as too much of a feminist and wanting to kind of appeal to a much broader base of people throughout the country and globally. That's kind of a risk. We saw that a little bit when, for example, she became Secretary of State, and she, many of us who were actually working on the issue of human trafficking were hoping that she would bring that issue back to the fore, because it was something that she had worked on as a First Lady, but in fact she didn't really address it at all because she had been criticized as First Lady as, you know, supporting prostitution. So she really distanced herself from that particular issue. So I'm just hoping that she herself doesn't feel like she can't do what she, you know, what's in her DNA, as we say, and go full force on supporting girls and women. The issue about post-conflict and conflict, I think, is such a huge issue. I don't think we're giving it enough thought. I think, you know, our daily news is giving us just horrifying stories of adolescent girls who are completely disenfranchised. And I'm not sure that we have the right ways of addressing girls in those environments. I think we need a lot more investment and discussion about that.
Yeah, and I would just shout out our colleagues from UNFPA, who I think do incredible work in some of the most challenging settings, post-conflict, humanitarian disasters, those settings, and the U.S. government hopefully will rely on them even more as a partner. I know we have friends from PRM here who do work in close partnership, so just to say I think that's one area that we could do a lot more on to reach women and girls in those kind of settings.
And I'm going to actually just, sorry, I'm going to take the prerogative as a moderator and just add to that, because it's, I think we heard a lot today on the panel about integration across sectors, and I think the question you're bringing is that integration across the development, the humanitarian, and frankly the peace and security divide, because we have women in peace and security. And so as a US government, I think that next step of really thinking about integration across those three is, I agree with you, something that we haven't necessarily done, but a really great thing for that next administration to maybe take on. I'm sorry, I'm just going to check with, according to my watch, we have 10 more minutes, yeah? If not, stop me. Okay, yes, we had a question here.
Good afternoon, I'm Erica Broaddus with GW. Thank you for being here, particularly Dr. Bertone. You just led my class on gender advising over the weekend. Thank you. My question is, obviously we're all advocates for education here, but what is the next step beyond that? Because to create a great supply of educated young women around the world has to be met with demand for their skills and obviously opportunities for them to have these wonderful dreams that we're talking about. So what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, let's take two more. I have one in the front row, one over there. I'm sorry, I'm trying to go both sides here. So.
Thanks for your presentation. Elise Phillips from World Vision. I was interested in the remark about kind of changing the reframing to gender equality and education, and wanted to hear more about your thoughts about, I mean, that resonates with me in terms of being able to look at the data in terms of, like you said, context-specific girls and boys, what's happening in the classroom, looking at equality. What do we run a risk, even if we think about maybe changing the kind of reframing to gender equality, or is it, what's your sense of how palpable is that? Are people able to kind of wrap their heads around girls versus kind of gender equality? I don't know if the SDGs kind of help us with that, but I was wondering more about your thoughts about that discourse around the gender equality in education.
Okay, we'll do one more, and then we'll do Oh, that's convenient. Okay. All right. Okay.
So on the education demand for skills front, I would add one more piece, which is that we can't just be educating girls, but also communities and families, and making sure that we're not having these fabulously educated, empowered girls who know their rights, who are stepping into horribly disempowering environments. Because how does that help them in the long run? So beyond making sure that they're educated, we need to make sure the communities are educated. And what I think that would do in parallel is make sure that families see girls as more than just potential wives and mothers. And it would open up kind of their world to what the alternatives to marriage and childbearing are. So that not only do the girls themselves see a future outside the home, working, producing in the community, but their families and communities do as well. Something that we talk a lot about with ending child marriage is that there need to be alternatives to child marriage in order to ensure that the kind of internal logic of marrying off girls is broken. And I think we need to bring all these factors together in order to do that.
Yes, actually, I have just to comment, Erica, thank you for that question. Another way of talking about this is in the context of what is being discussed as integrated development. So looking at multiple development areas and looking at how adolescent girls are integral to making sure we're able to affect outcomes in other areas, such as nutrition, such as civil society, looking more at girls' and women's involvement in countering violent extremism, and looking at ways in which education and health intersect, and so I think this then moves to commenting, Elise, on your comment, which is about, yes, there is a slight risk in changing and reframing what we're talking about to gender equality instead of girls' education. Of course, we risk then not focusing on girls anymore, and then it gets too broad and people don't really know what that means when you say gender equality. There's still a lot of misunderstanding. So maybe it's both, and it's girls' education and gender equality in education. Maybe it's, yes, we increase, or we keep and increase our investment in girls' education, but we don't forget the boys. So when we're doing girls' education projects, we're also providing mentoring to boys. We're also helping boys, adolescent boys in particular, explore the social norms in which they live, in which they, are also victims of violence in school settings, victims of physical and psychological and sometimes sexual violence in the context of their school environments and their home and their community, and having a better understanding of what happens with those young men when they grow up and possibly they become, perpetrators of violence because we didn't pay attention to them. We were paying attention to girls, which is great, but again, not to the social norms around which, and I really agree with you, Lena, is like you can empower a girl, but if they're stepping into an unchanged social environment, there's only so much that that girl can do to affect change in her life if everyone else around her hasn't changed.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about kind of intergenerational change and the need to make sure that we're working for this generation of girls, but also to change the world for the next generation, and ensuring that boys are educated, not just educated in kind of the writing, math, arithmetic sense, but the gender dynamics, what are power relationships in the kind of comprehensive sexuality education sense, is something that we can do to make sure that the boys of today, who are going to be the fathers and husbands of tomorrow, are helping to create that empowering environment that the girls of today, who are going to be the women of tomorrow, are living in.
I think my colleagues have covered it.
Yeah.
So happy to do more questions.
Okay. Well, I think we have to actually wrap up. So I think we're going to stop there unless you have some parting comments you want to make, Kate? No? Okay. Well, I just wanted to say, when I walked in today and just looking around the room, I see so many familiar faces. And I think about the last 8 years and everything we've achieved when it comes to this. I get emotional when it comes to this agenda. And it's phenomenal. And I'm reminded of, what Margaret Mead says about how never believe that a few caring, committed individuals can't change the world, because in the end, that's all it ever has. And everyone here has had a role to play in one way or another, and that's just phenomenal. And no matter what happens in a couple of weeks, there's a lot more work to be done, and I know you're going to be out there fighting the good fight. So thank you. Thank you for what you've done and what you continue to do. All right, and thanks to our fantastic panelists. Such an honor. All right.
Hello. For those of you who just arrived later, and those of you who are online watching this, I am still Françoise Girard, the president of the International Women's Health Coalition. And I want to thank this panel that we just had with the wonderful moderator that is Daniela. We certainly had some interesting food for thought on how the US government can build on the work of the last 8 years and continue to advance the rights of girls. So I'm very grateful for the insights and the direction that was provided by this panel. But then we thought we should also give the US government itself a chance to speak about that very subject. And we're very pleased to have someone from the White House with us today. So maybe we should change the slide, remove the Capitol building and put the White House there. So I'm very, very pleased to have the opportunity to introduce Mary Beth Goodman, who will speak to us this afternoon. Mrs. Goodman is the Special Assistant to President Obama and the Senior Director for Development and Democracy for the National Security Council at the White House, where she is responsible for a huge agenda which covers global development, health, democracy, and humanitarian matters. So she may be able to speak to us about that divide between development and humanitarian issues and how we get adolescent girls across that. And prior to that role, Mrs. Goodman worked for the Departments of State as well as Homeland Security, and she's held a number of postings overseas. She's also served as a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress and a senior advisor for the Enough Project, which is an initiative to end genocide and crimes against humanity. Ms. Goodman is a lawyer. She's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. She's a certified mediator in conflict resolution. Could be useful. And above all else, I have to say that she's also a French speaker. So I think even more highly of her as a result. So bienvenue, Madame Goodman. Nous vous écoutons. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I'm actually really thrilled to be here, but my apologies at the top because
I'm getting over a terrible cold, so I sound more like a frog than intended. It's certainly not a bad imitation. It's just the unfortunate aftermath of this cold. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I do work at the White House, and it has been my privilege to serve as the special assistant to the president and to work on a whole host of issues. And from this vantage point, I've been privileged to have the pleasure of working with many of you. I see a lot of familiar faces in the crowd, and have had an extraordinary opportunity to work on advancing girls' empowerment and gender equality globally. Every day there are a range of development issues and efforts from food security, global health, energy, to humanitarian response. But more and more often, we're making sure that education is also part of that day-to-day work. A lot of times at the White House, especially on the National Security Council, the urgent often crowds out the necessary. And more often, we're trying to see that we're including education as part of that necessary work in the day-to-day. Through each of these challenges, whether it's been Ebola or Syria, President Obama has repeatedly defined global development, not just as something that's nice to do, but something that we must do. The president has been our most vocal advocate that global development is directly tied to our national security. That, quote, progress in the poorest countries can advance the prosperity and security of people far beyond their borders, end quote. As a result of his leadership and the efforts of this administration, through initiatives like Feed the Future, Power Africa, or our Global Health Security Agenda, we've made significant progress in dramatically reducing poverty, malnutrition, and improving child and maternal health, all of which has spurred improvements in the resilience and inclusive growth opportunities for communities around the world. Yet our work to eliminate poverty, achieve social justice, stabilize populations, and prevent foreseeable humanitarian crises are threatened every day, and there's much work that needs to be done. We are up against the violence of war, the impacts of climate change, the entrenchment of old attitudes, and the effects of corruption. But even in the face of all of these challenges, there's one unifying factor that we can focus on that makes a tremendous difference, and that is to lift up our women. Gender equality, which, as you know, is one of our Sustainable Development Goals. Gender equality is not only a matter of fundamental rights, it is a matter fundamental to economic growth and stability. Getting gender equality in the Sustainable Development Goals was one of the hardest negotiations and hardest battles we had. And I know there are a lot of you who did a lot of work to make that progress possible. So thank you for that, but there's a lot more to do. We didn't just get it in Goal 5. We actually got it embedded throughout the Sustainable Development Goals overall. Many of the indicators, after the negotiations ended last year, we continued the work among governments to develop those indicators by which we'll measure our success. As many of you know, there aren't enough indicators in this space. We don't have the data that we need to show the progress that we hope to make. So there are many efforts going on now to try and define those gaps and trying to figure out ways to measure progress. And I encourage all of you to start lending your voice now to that urgent need. Research has shown that when women are empowered and educated, they'll help bring down poverty, they'll help grow economies, they'll invest back in their communities. In 2016, there was a report from McKinsey that found if women played identical roles as men in labor markets, global GDP would rise by $28 trillion by 2025. $28 trillion in less than 10 years. When women are empowered and educated, they help build strong, stable, and resilient nations, where the poisonous ideologies of ISIL and Boko Haram have a harder time taking root. When women are empowered and educated, they help shape freer and fairer societies, capable of advancing our most fundamental freedoms and living up to our highest ideals. So I can't emphasize enough, lifting up women around the world isn't charity. It is vital to our national security. It is one of the smartest and most effective investments that we can make in our foreign policy. Nations that marginalize women are often the source of so much instability and violence, and that is not a coincidence. As President Obama likes to say, the single best indicator of whether a nation will succeed is how it treats its women. This leads me to why we're all here today. It's about the important work that you do. Because to ensure that we have empowered and educated women, we must focus our efforts on making sure we have empowered and educated girls. From the very beginning of this administration, We have prioritized empowering and educating girls in our diplomacy and development work. Our U.S. strategy to prevent and respond to gender-based violence globally identifies child, early, and forced marriage as a form of gender-based violence and emphasizes the need to address this practice in countries where it's most prevalent. To address the full range of challenges facing adolescent girls, the U.S. Department earlier this year launched the first of its kind U.S. strategy to empower adolescent girls. And a year and a half ago, under the leadership of our inspiring First Lady, we launched Let Girls Learn, which is working to ensure that all adolescent girls currently out of school can get a quality education and reach their full potential. I want to spend a few minutes talking about Let Girls Learn, because I know many of you are wondering what will happen to this initiative once the President and First Lady leave office in January. I'm not at liberty to impart any details, mostly because I don't know them myself, but also because the lawyers would never allow it, on what they themselves are going to do. And there's no guarantees of what will happen in a new administration. But the First Lady has repeatedly stated in every forum that she's been in lately that she is committing to working for the rest of her life on girls' education. And we in the US government have plans to continue as well. I wanted to share some of the concrete steps that we've taken to institutionalize Let Girls Learn. When we launched Let Girls Learn, we knew we couldn't take the usual approach. Yes, Let Girls Learn looked to tackle traditional problems that adolescent girls face in getting a quality education, like crumbling schools or the shortage of and quality of teachers or expensive school fees. But we also have reached beyond the education sector to take a very comprehensive perspective to tackle this problem. In many ways, what makes Let Girls Learn transformative is that we're tackling the problem from all sides. Let Girls Learn couldn't just be about the challenges in the classroom. We knew that we had to do something about the barriers girls face to even get there, like child and early forced marriage, teenage pregnancy, or the disproportionately high number of adolescent girls and young women affected by HIV/AIDS. We are making a concerted effort to also address the social barriers. In fact, if you had a chance to listen to the First Lady talk about this issue, or if you were able to watch the recent CNN documentary on Let Girls Learn called We Will Rise, and I do hope you've seen it, you know that the social norms that devalue girls and their education, that's what the First Lady really focuses on and raises awareness about. Another way that Let Girls Learn has been effective, and we think will be sustainable, is the way that we have coordinated efforts by different federal agencies. While the NSC played a coordination role, it was the State Department, USAID, MCC, Peace Corps, and most recently the Department of Labor and the Department of Agriculture that have come together to make this initiative a success. We all know that government agencies can sometimes get siloed in their approach or trip over each other in the same space. Those of you who have worked in government know what an understatement that sentence is. That's not the case with Let Girls Learn. In fact, one of the key characteristics of this initiative has been the coordination between agencies and leveraging their roles so that each agency is able to build on it. For instance, Peace Corps is addressing this issue at a very grassroots, community-led perspective, training thousands of volunteers and engaging in local projects with the help to empower adolescent girls. We now have Peace Corps volunteers working on Let Girls Learn in 35 countries and are planning to expand into more. The volunteers are meeting with community leaders and young women to engage on educational efforts and to help get more adolescent girls in school. USAID flexes its broad development expertise, everything from funding training for female teachers in Afghanistan to giving teenage mothers in Liberia the opportunity for another chance to continue to school, to providing dormitories and support for girls in rural Morocco to successfully transition to secondary school in urban areas. And there are many more examples around the globe. USAID has invested over $600 million in new and ongoing programs in 13 countries to support Let Girls Learn. The State Department's diplomacy and public outreach helps to facilitate Let Girls Learn multilateral, bilateral, and regional engagement, and as well supports over $10 million in programming to address barriers that restrict adolescent girls' empowerment in support of the Adolescent Girls Strategy. Other agencies and offices like PEPFAR, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, the Department of Labor, and USDA, While they may not be at the front of your minds on what they can do for education, they are key partners in this initiative. PEPFAR has linked adolescent girls' education directly to a reduction in HIV infection rates. And as a result, they've mainstreamed investments totaling $85 million through the DREAMS partnership, which is specifically focused on helping adolescent girls transition to and remain in secondary schools across 10 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. The Millennium Challenge Corporation's mission is to reduce poverty through economic growth. And based on joint assessments with governments where MCC engages, they have found that improving girls' education in countries like Morocco, Georgia, and El Salvador can unlock the potential of these economies. They're now Let Girls Learn partners in those countries. Department of Labor looks to eradicate the worst forms of child labor, and they have looked to education to help address the problems of adolescent girls being targeted for this harmful practice. And likewise, the Department of Agriculture, through their McGovern-Dole program, not only reduces hunger and also promotes girls' education through their school feeding assistance programs around the world. Right now, they're working very closely with USAID to have a deep dive in Malawi as a focus country. So you can see we're really taking a comprehensive approach to this very complex issue. And because of this coordination between these different agencies, our investments in girls' education have been more effective and, more importantly, more sustainable. As we're entering into the transition season, we've been doing a lot of work internally to make sure that we're messaging what we need to transition and the comprehensive nature of this unique arrangement that we've worked out on Let Girls Learn. Last Tuesday, on International Day of the Girl, we laid out a roadmap for Let Girls Learn. We defined 3 strategic objectives for the initiative that will be guideposts for the agencies to continue their work through transition and we hope beyond. The first of these is to foster an enabling environment for adolescent girls' education. Second, to change the perception of the value of girls at the individual, community, and institutional levels. And third, to engage and equip girls to be agents of change. I see a lot of heads nodding. You all are not our target audience, right? You know what this is about. But to truly get that defined in a way that we can pass it on and have that be embedded in some of the institutional engagement is exactly what we're trying to do. To make sure that we have further aligned our programs under Let Girls Learn and that we continue to be consistent among agencies, we've explicitly defined that all U.S. government programs implemented under Let Girls Learn will continue to focus on achieving one or more of the following outcomes. There are 4. 1, ensuring relevant quality education that benefits adolescent girls. 2, empowering adolescent girls with information, skills, services, and support as a part of their education. 3, reducing barriers to adolescent girls, access to and completion of school. And 4, addressing harmful practices, such as child and early forced marriage, other forms of gender-based violence, and the worst forms of child labor. But coordination and an internal framework aren't the only mechanisms that we've put in place. Let Girls Learn is also following the administration's approach to development overall. We've tried to deepen partnerships with multilateral organizations and civil society, with the private sector, and with faith-based communities, and most importantly, with people on the ground. In other words, Let Girls Learn recognizes that even though this is a U.S. government initiative, the U.S. government certainly cannot do it alone. We have partnered with other governments in this effort, to include the United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, Canada, Mexico, the Nordic states, to marshal their expertise and their resources to be partners in this effort in the countries where they engage. We've worked with countries like Cambodia, Jordan, Pakistan, Liberia, and Morocco to make an impact for adolescent girls in their own countries. And this work continues. In the final stretch of the administration, we are continuing to solidify these partnerships and to reach out to other governments so that we can keep up this effort to remove these barriers that adolescent girls face. And then there's you. Certainly you have all been a key part of this effort. Advocates, implementers, researchers, all of you here are lending your voice. We have leaned on your support and your expertise in this initiative. To better tap on your expertise, we launched a challenge fund in recognition that no organization can crack this issue of adolescent girls' education. Through the Challenge Fund, USAID is looking to maximize our impact by partnering with a wide collection of different stakeholders: public organizations, private sector companies, governments, international donor organizations. The idea was to foster collaboration amongst a diverse group of implementers to foster innovative, locally based solutions. Essentially, it's crowdsourcing in the development space. The Challenge Fund efforts initially focused on Malawi and Tanzania, and we just announced the implementers who will be working in each of these countries. This year, we're looking to expand this collaborative approach, and President Obama recently announced the addition of Laos and Nepal to the Challenge Fund. But you know that the work in this area is far from done, and as we dive more deeply into the work and we continue to make some progress, we also have a greater understanding for the issues. For those of you who have followed this narrative about the need for adolescent girls' education, you know that this global conversation centered around the goal of helping 62 million girls who were out of school, half of whom who were adolescent girls. There was, and continues to be, a tremendous global effort to reach gender parity for these young girls in primary school and young adolescent girls moving into secondary school. But over the last year and a half, as we've learned more about these girls and the significant barriers they face to get a quality education, this global conversation has evolved, as has our view within the US government on how to best make sure we're tackling this population. The world, and Let Girls Learn, has begun to shine a light on the need for all adolescent girls to not just complete primary education or early secondary education, but to stay in school all the way through high school. Your efforts and efforts around the world called attention to the challenges these girls face during this vulnerable time period, which is why Let Girls Learn has narrowed its focus on girls between the ages of 10 and 19 years old. In fact, according to a UNESCO report released in July of this year, there are 98 million older adolescent girls, who are being denied the opportunity to complete 12 years of education through secondary school. 98 million young women, brimming with energy and talent, who don't have the chance to reach their full potential. So we all still have our work cut out for us. In a few short months, this administration will come to a close, but we'll count on you to help us continue the effort. Count on you to offer your insights, your research, and your expertise. We're going to continue to ask you to continue to partner with U.S. agencies who are involved in this work. And please consider working with us through opportunities such as the Challenge Fund and other grassroots efforts in particular. We're going to continue to come together at summits like this and exchange our ideas and build a stronger evidence base. We ask you to continue to do your extraordinary work to promote women and girls around the world. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today, but most importantly, thank you for all that you do each and every day to improve the lives of women and girls around the world. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth, for those wonderful remarks. And thank you for you guys for staying till now. Good afternoon. I'm here to introduce the last speaker. My name is Bernadette Francis, and I'm the campaign coordinator for the Girl Up campaign. It's a campaign of United Nations Foundation. It is the only campaign of the UN Foundation that focuses on adolescent girls. Although after hearing former President Banda speak, I'm actually thinking maybe we should start a little bit early than adolescent girls. It is a campaign that is led by the global community of passionate advocates, changing policies and raising funds to support United Nations programs. Our efforts help the hardest to reach girls living in places where it is truly hard to be a girl. Our motto is for girls, by girls. It is with this that I'm extremely pleased today to introduce Anna McGuire as the next speaker. Anna is a senior at Walt Whitman High School in Bethesda, Maryland. Anna has quite literally been with Girl Up from the beginning. She started a Girl Up club at Pyle Middle School in 2011 and then formed a new Girl Up Club at Walt Whitman High School, where she's acting president. As president, she successfully hosted more than 13 different events, including many fundraisers, like the school-wide leadership, like the March Madness tournament, sorry, tongue twisting, countless movie nights, and a school-wide leadership summit. Anna has participated in everything from panels about girls' philanthropy at the National Press Club to meeting with Senator Durbin on child marriage to the women in the United States of Women this year. Notably, Anna spoke on stage at the 2016 Girl Up Leadership Summit on the linkages between social media and grassroots activism. Anna was chosen from hundreds of girls from across the country to become teen advisor from 2013 to 2014. In this role, she led advocacy initiatives, participated in high-level speaking opportunities, and helped organize and mobilize a coalition of Girl Up clubs in the DMV region. Her leadership and accomplishment earned her the role of Teen Advisor co-chair from 2014 to 2015, where she was one of the 2 returning teen advisors to mentor and create programming for a new board of powerful, passionate girls. As a teen advisor and a club leader, she sent a combined 112 letters to members of Congress in support of the Girls Count Act, which was successfully passed into law last year. Anna is a humble leader who works tirelessly for women's and girls' rights, despite also being active in theater and debate. Many of you probably already know Anna, which says a lot, because she also goes to school full-time. Please welcome Anna.
Good afternoon. I want to first thank Bernadette for the lovely introduction, and I really would love to thank all of the coordinators for putting this awesome event together, especially because it means I got to miss my 8th period presentation on Beowulf. So that was really the highlight of today. But anyways, if I just could go into a little bit more background about my experience with Girl Up. Like Bernadette said, I've been involved with the campaign since I was in 6th grade, and it's pretty crazy to think that I will be attending college next fall. I have really appreciated all that Girl Up's done for me, especially in giving me opportunities to speak to girls and women and men and boys about my experiences and what I really think is important in the world. I initially became involved with Girl Up in 6th grade when my mom, who's also sort of involved in this women and girls development sphere, took me to an event downtown. At first, I thought it was just another event she was dragging me to because they asked you to bring your daughters, and I expected probably some programming and maybe some light snacks. I was completely blown out of the water. Besides being starstruck by the fact that the American Next Top Model photographer, Nigel Barker, was there, which was a personal highlight for me, I really began contextualizing and understanding the issues that my mom had worked on before. I looked around and I saw that many girls had to carry water over 6 or 7 miles in order to help their family get water for drinking and for bathing and for cleaning clothes. Behind the fancy posters, I recognized that girls my age were being married in multiple developing countries. I recognized that many girls didn't have the opportunity to go to school, something I've been going to since I was age 3. I always knew that I was privileged growing up in a community right outside of Washington, D.C., but I never realized exactly how far that privilege stretched. I never realized that my family had the financial stability to send me to Harry Potter, all of the movies, something that no one else really has the opportunity, a lot of people don't have the opportunity to do. I had the opportunity to pick when or if I was ever going to get married. I had the opportunity to attend school, and I had the opportunity to buy any materials I needed for school. These are all things that girls might not necessarily have access to in the developing world. Things as simple as a birth certificate, which I need to get my driver's license or to receive medical care, is something that girls, and in some cases boys, aren't having access to in the developing world. I finally realized how important these issues were, these basics that I took for granted, things that are going to serve me for the rest of my life, like an education, and like having decisions about my own life, like when or if to get married, are things that many girls don't have access to. Immediately, I was struck, and I decided I needed to go back to my community and do something. As soon as I returned to middle school, I decided I needed to start a club. At first, we started with 5 people, and we met once a week after school in Miss McDermott's room. We played Pictionary and we talked about the issues facing girls, but eventually we decided we needed to expand. It was important that everyone at Pyle and eventually in our community knew about the issues facing girls. Now I'm happy to say that we have a club of over 130 members, and like Bernadette was saying, we host our annual March Madness fundraiser, and this year we're gearing up to do another Leadership Summit Day for the entire school. I'd also like to add that for the past 4 years, we've had a male co-president, which I think is an important aspect of running a club for gender equality. But aside from all of my experience with Girl Up, I've been involved with women's empowerment and girls' leadership since I was 3 years old. It's a running joke in my family that when I had a lemonade stand on our corner at age 4, instead of donating the money to myself or maybe buying a pet, I decided I was going to send it to women in Malawi. Of course, growing up with a mom who's been involved in the sphere has been very influential, but it really has taken my time and experience with Girl Up and a bit of maturity for me to truly understand the ramifications and impact of working with girls and inspiring them. I really began to wonder and think about why these issues matter after I attended my first summit with Girl Up. Of course, I'm committed to preserving equality. I want to make sure that every girl has the opportunities that I have, the opportunity to attend college, to pursue the career path they want to pursue without feeling pressure from their society, their family, or being limited by economic or environmental resources. Also, I recognize that girls can be extremely important leaders. As the older sister of a 13-year-old girl, I definitely understand how persuasive or annoying occasionally they can be. But in all seriousness, I know from firsthand experience that when girls are given the opportunity to speak out and advocate for what they want to speak on behalf of, they do it. Working with Girl Up, I've had the opportunity to work with girls all over the United States, ranging from age 6 to age 26. And what I've learned from that is that girls want to speak on behalf of the issues they find important. And when you give them the opportunity to meet with change makers, when you give them the opportunity to meet with world leaders, they will advocate for the issues that they find the most important. And I think it's really imperative that we all give them that opportunity. I think the fact that many girls, unfortunately, are discounted worldwide and their opinions are tossed aside simply because of their gender or their age is extremely discouraging. We need to be giving girls opportunities to speak out and advocate for what they believe strongly in order to make changes. What I especially love about Girl Up is the fact that it's really a twofold organization. While obviously helping girls in the developing world find empowerment and have the resources to succeed is important, we also are dedicated to making sure that girls are finding leadership opportunities, even if they aren't in a developing country. Bernadette said the campaign is for girls by girls, and I really truly believe that's true. Aside from helping girls in Malawi and India and Guatemala get bicycles to go to school and trying to pass legislation to ensure they aren't married at age 13 and 14, we're giving girls in countries like the US and the UK the opportunity to speak out for the issues they find truly important. Over the past summer, I was with Girl Up for the 2016 Leadership Summit, which is a 3-day event where we hear speakers like last year Michelle Obama, which was amazing, but also hearing from women like Kate Gilmore and Ashley Graham, who talk about the issues they find important. The third day of the summit is my favorite. It culminates in a half day where all the girls who have attended the summit get to walk on Capitol Hill and advocate for the issues and bills that they find most important. This year, I was happy to be a staff lead, which meant that I got to shepherd 12 girls around Capitol Hill, and for a DC native, it was a bit tricky. But we found our way around, and after our third meeting of the day, we walked in to find Madeleine Albright sitting waiting for us. Besides being completely shell-shocked, I walked away from the meeting with a really valuable experience. Our 2 meetings earlier in the day, there was this small, shy girl named Emily who was 11 years old. For our first 2 meetings of the day, she sat quietly and patiently listening to the other girls talk, but as soon as we got her into that third meeting, she immediately blossomed. She asked Madeleine Albright about what it was like to be Secretary of State and how did she get involved in politics, and would Madeleine Albright like to know why she cares about Girl Up? It was really inspirational and an awesome feeling to see this girl get the opportunity to speak to someone who has the opportunity to make a difference, to share her passion for Girl Up and to share what she's interested in. I saw that spark in Emily that I felt in myself when I first attended a Girl Up event in 6th grade. And I think it's important to remember that all girls have the opportunity to have that spark. If we give them the resources and the ability to find what they're interested in and then give them the opportunity to pursue it, we're looking at a new generation of leaders. In only a few short years, we're going to be looking at a new generation of political leaders and people making changes in the community. It's imperative that we make sure girls have the opportunity to find resources and find the things that motivate them and interest them, because they are the ones who will be leading all of us in just a few short years. Ultimately, I believe that we are all committed, clearly, to gender equality, but I think we need to remember that when we're looking at girls, we need to give them the opportunity to find that spark and to find what really empowers them. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Anna, for these rousing remarks. I think we're in really good hands with you as a leader. It's really amazing. Now, I won't summarize all that we heard today because there's so much. It was so rich. But I'd like to leave you with 3 key points to take away and think about as we go home. The first one is from the earlier set of panels was about on the research side, about the fact that we know enough to take action today. We know enough to build girl-centered programs right now and scale them up. There are no excuses for not acting. It's not, we need to know more, etc. That's not an excuse. We know that we must take multi-sectoral, long-term approaches. And of course, we know that we must keep doing research to continue to evaluate what we're doing so that we understand better the context and the different segments of girls we're trying to work with. But we can act now. So that's the first point. The second point is we need US leadership. We need US leadership to keep the international community focused on girls, and we need leadership that is sustained through the next administration. We need the right level of ambition, not, what we heard, not decreased ambition, whether it's through dreams or whether it's through the gender strategy. I also heard a call to make the global strategy to empower adolescent girls permanent through an executive order, and I think we all second that. Yes? Yes. So let's push for that. And make sure that girls are not just parked into development, but are not left out of security, peace and security conversations and humanitarian conversations. We need adolescent girls across the board, right? So that's the second point. And then the third point on the advocacy side, about our own commitments, all of us, researchers, advocates, activists, policy people, we need to hold the US government's feet to the fire. We're facing a tricky time with the transition, and we need to make sure that they keep at it, that they don't drop it, that it doesn't fall off, through the cracks and off the table. We have to keep fighting for these comprehensive programs, each one of us. It's taking too much work to get us to where we are today. We can't drop the ball. Because if we do that, I think we can really make a lot of progress in the next 8 years. Now, I want to thank all of you for being here and being here till the end. I want to thank President Banda, who spoke so eloquently earlier on, Ms. Goodman, from really speaking from the White House perspective. I want to thank all of our speakers who were so inspiring and amazing, and also our co-sponsors, CGD, the Pop Council, ICRW, CARE USA, GNB USA. And I want to make a special reference and special thanks to our very own Lena at the International Women's Health Coalition for putting this together. Thank you to all of you for this. I want to thank you participants here and all of you online who are watching us. We look forward to continuing to work with you. And I would be remiss if I didn't quote Beyonce as we leave. Remember that girls rule the world. See you next year. Thank you.